This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to declare the meeting open. So can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. The main items for discussion today are the Docklands Light Railway, and in the second part of the meeting it will be London Travel Watch's business plan for 2004-2005. Please make sure that your electronic devices are set to silent. Can I also ask members and guests, your microphones, if you can position them close to you as possible, but please do not pull the stalk just by the base, if that's okay. Thank you. And then can I start by asking Clerk Paul Goodchild if there are any apologies at all?
Thank you, Chairman. No apologies for absence, but Assembly Member Moemo will be joining remotely today.
Lovely. Can we note the recommendations set out on item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we confirm the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 7th of November 2023 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. And can we note the completed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Transport Committee?
Noted.
Lovely. We now move on to the first main item, which is a question and answer session on the Docklands Light Railway. I would like to welcome our guests for this discussion. Trish Ashton, Director of Rail and Sponsored Services, TfL. Welcome, Trish. Tom Page, General Manager of DLR, TfL. Welcome, Tom. Matthew Yates, Head of Projects and Consents, TfL, and... Yeah, no, sorry, I thought you were going to say something else that's onto the page. The and relates to Richard, sorry. So, welcome Matthew, and then can I welcome Richard Graham, Managing Director of KeolisAmey, Docklands. Lovely. Thank you very much for coming to help us in our investigation today. So, I will kick off. My first question is to TfL. You can fight amongst yourselves as to which one answers it first. What are the targets in the current franchise agreements between TfL and KAD agreement, and how is KAD performing, please? Yeah, you press your button, that's it.
Is that good? Thanks very much. So there's quite a few, is the short answer. The kind of primary one for us in terms of an incentive, in other words, something that KeolisAmey Docklands can be rewarded or penalised for, is around performance of the railway. And so for us, that's about the trains leaving on time and taking the time they should take to move between. But there are many different aspects also covered by the franchise agreement, which include, as I've noted, revenue protection, but also the condition of stations, and the delivery of the asset management regime, although that's not directly financially incentivised, that's just a requirement. And of course there's lots of other commitments around things like safety, but we don't reward on safety in that sort of way. We just have mandatory requirements around it.
Did you want to add anything to that, Trish? Are you okay?
No, I think Tom's given a comprehensive answer about what areas we do manage their performance, and I think there was a bit of the question that said, and how are CAD doing against those? Yes. So I think certainly for the key measure that Tom mentioned there in terms of railway performance, CAD's achieving 98.8% departure score, which is, when I look across kind of TfL operations, is very impressive, and most railway operators would be very pleased with delivering that level of reliability.
Brilliant. Lovely. So the current franchise ends in 2025. When will a future franchise extension be next considered, and what will be the process?
So I'll kick off and then hand to Tom to do a bit more detail. So it won't be an extension to the existing franchise. We have extended KeolisAmey Docklands in their current franchise, but we've extended them to the point which we are legally permitted to do so within procurement guidelines. So we've actually already commenced the refranchising process out to the marketplace, but I'll hand over to Tom to give you a bit more detail because he's been working through that himself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First of all, I should say that because that process is underway at the moment, we've already gone through what's called the selection questionnaire, where we find a short list of bidders, and we're soon to go out in January with the invitation to tender. I have to be slightly careful with what I can and can't talk about because it's an active procurement. I don't want to prejudice that process. But what I can say is that the timelines for it are that we will begin it obviously on the 1st of April 2025. That's when this franchise ends, and so we seamlessly move over to the new one, and that means we need to do most of the procurement activity next calendar year. So going out in January to start the invitation to tender, receiving back the bids, and then signing up with a new operator by the end of the year, so sort of October through December period.
Thank you very much. So my next question is to all members of the panel. DLR journeys have increased year on year by around 9%, which is higher than any other modes. What are the reasons for this increased ridership on the DLR? Any takers for that?
Again, I'll kick off, and then I would imagine hand to Tom, who is eager to provide a bit more detail. But some of it is absolutely due to the geography of the DLR and the communities that it serves. Since the very inception of the DLR, it was there to be able to facilitate growth in the Docklands area, bringing forward lots of housing, as well as wider economic development. And we haven't really seen that slow down throughout the lifespan of the DLR, and we're really pleased that actually it can still be that real force for regeneration across the areas that it serves. Tom, did you want to add anything into that?
I think only ever so slightly, and it's on the point that we've seen so much development around the railway, of course, but also we're quite lucky with the system that we have. It enables us to kind of reconfigure it. I'm not saying it's with ease, but it can have slightly more flexibility than some other systems. So where we've seen that demand, we've been able to sort of assign more of our trains to the areas where we perceived it would be busier or more attractive for people to travel.
Are we seeing larger increase in some parts of the service than others?
Yeah, so we're seeing a larger increase in the east, essentially. So we're seeing, as Tom said, more development, more building development going on in the east of London, and that's driving more ridership in that area. I'll also add on the previous point, we're also running more events on the network, more events venues that are busier, expanding, and that's also contributing to increased ridership.
And with the advent of the Elizabeth line, how did that affect the DLR? And did it meet in with your projections, or did it do better, worse?
I think it's a very difficult thing to get those projections right, and I think rightly when we look at something like the Elizabeth line, we try and make sure we're being balanced and looking at the whole kind of network effect. So you obviously get more journeys on the Elizabeth line because it wasn't there, but you expect some what we would call abstraction, taking away from other services. We're always very uncertain about exactly the quantity of abstraction that will take place, and it can take quite some time for people to, for example, move house or change job because of it. So we try not to be sort of too overconfident. However, I think what we found in the DLR was we were able to perhaps be a little bit better than we had expected. We were expecting some abstraction. We didn't really see that. What we probably saw is a change of trips. So we saw perhaps people making more shorter trips to connect up with, say, the Elizabeth line at Custom House, for example.
Interesting. So, what impact has the new timetables had?
It's a really good question. I mean, I suppose there's two things to pick up here. One is we ran a specific timetable during COVID, and that had particular criteria about coping with the potential for more staff absence and by allowing people to space out more on the vehicles. So we ran full-length trains everywhere, but that necessitated a lower frequency. So a big part of us switching the timetables was going back to a service more akin to what was run in 2019 or before COVID. But we also were trying to not just sort of copy and paste what we'd done before, but to build on the fact we knew we had improvements across the railway. So we had more people using the Beckton branch, partly because of the Elizabeth line. And so we tried not to just sort of exactly replicate that, and we think it's been quite successful. We think that's been why we've seen some of the strong demand growth we have seen, sort of around 10% demand growth in the most recent week for which we have data, which seems positive. So we think that's the case, and when we've looked at where we've seen trip demand, it is well aligned with where the timetable has implemented.
Sorry, can I just add to the end of that? I think Tom already spoke about the additional flexibility that the DLR's got, but also because of the changing demand where we have further housing developments coming on board, and with some of the Elizabeth line abstraction, it's been really key to us to be able to flex the services that we're offering in response to that, rather than, as Tom said, going back to that kind of carbon copy of what we ran previously. So the flexibility in the system allows us to do that and respond to the changing demand that we see across the DLR network.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Tom and Richard, for the visit. Last week before, it was fantastic. Last Friday, wasn't it? Week ago on Friday. Fantastic. Really interesting. I just want to pick up, Richard, you said it had grown in the east of London. Is that the Beckton line specifically? Which line? Because obviously it is kind of east of London, the service.
Sure, of course. The eastern end of the network, I should have said. Putting the Beckton shuttle on, so we call it the Beckton shuttle, which basically doubles the frequency in the east. That's where we've seen significant growth there, and we're running trains now every 5 minutes rather than every 10 minutes, and that's in response to that increased demand on that branch.
So it's the Beckton branch particularly that you've seen the growth?
Yes.
Right, okay, just wanted to clarify that. In terms of, you're forecasting growth of 40% above 2023 levels by 2031. That's only 8 years away. How confident are you that your current project plan for the DLR is going to be able to cope with that kind of level of growth?
It's probably poor mental arithmetic on my part, but I can't quite remember what the percentage change is by 2030. But I think the point stands that we're expecting considerable extra demand on the network, and a huge amount of that is because of all the development across the network. And we're a railway that was built to support growth of East London. It wasn't to try and sort of stop it from happening, quite the opposite. So that's been a huge part of why we've invested in the new rolling stock. So just a quick reminder, that's
we're going to come on to the rolling stock, so don't go into too much
detail. I won't
detail.
go into. I'll do it very briefly. What I will say then is the new trains we're receiving, we're not just replacing the same number of trains, we'll have about 50%, slightly more than 50% more capacity on the network. So that's a huge boost for us, and we'll be applying that capacity where we think the demand will grow. And as Trish has already said, if in reality we see changes to that, we'll respond to that and change the timetables accordingly.
Okay, so it's not just so the new trains will help with all
hugely,
that. Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's lovely. And what about the current rates of reliability on the DLR? You've talked about much of the timetable you have managed to run, but how reliable is the current fleet, and what are the biggest challenges in general in the whole network?
I fear you're perhaps hearing too much from me, but on the current fleet, we are very realistic about those trains. I mean, they've served us really well, but they have come beyond, in truth, the end of their original expected life. They're light rail vehicles that were built in the 1990s as light rail vehicles with a kind of corresponding short expected life. So they're definitely not our most reliable fleet across TfL. We're very aware of that. What I will say is that I think we have got very used to being able to manage and respond to incident with those. So what's most important for us is not a kind of statistic about rolling stock reliability, but about what the customers experience. And that's when Trish was talking earlier on about our headline performance figures. We think the customers still see a very good service despite the disruption that trains can cause if we have problems. However, it's a huge plus that the new trains will be considerably more reliable.
Lovely.
And I think worth pointing out that since the trains came in, we've taken advantage of new technologies and new maintenance approaches. So actually some of that initial predicted lifespan was based on what was known at the time. Now we've got a lot more digital data. We can be a lot more data-driven in some of our decision-making. So obviously, as assets, and particularly with trains, as they get older, you see more faults occurring. But actually, jointly, the TfL and CAD team have done a fantastic job at looking at the best ways to extend the life of that rolling stock. And it comes to the point of making that decision around the cost of those improvements versus the reprocurement of the trains, which is why we are where we are, introducing the new rolling stock.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning. Just like change of direction. Just thinking about fare evasion. So how significant an impact? I don't know if this is you, Tom. I was going to say, I don't know if we've heard from you too much or not enough, but if you're the right person to answer the question, then that's just the right amount, I would say. But how significant a problem is fare evasion on the DLR?
Yeah, I'm very happy to start. So we obviously take fare evasion very seriously on the network. We run, as part of our contract, we run a whole series of revenue blocks. So obviously a large chunk of the network is gateless. It doesn't have ticket gates in the same way the London Underground does. And we run approximately 40 revenue blocks a period to control fare evasion. Now those revenue blocks give us an indication of just over 1% in terms of fare evasion. We think that's slightly lower than what we're actually seeing on the network, and the ticketless travel surveys that TfL run give us somewhere between 3 and 4% in terms of fare evasion on the network.
So what's a revenue block?
Sorry, we have a team of 7 or 8 individuals that will be manually standing by the exit or entrance to the station and checking tickets and issuing penalty fare notices.
And presumably the reason why you think the figure they get is a bit different from the overall is because people spot it and they decide to go one stop further and then walk
Absolutely.
back. Yeah.
And they're in high vis equipment, and also anything on social media or messaging outside of that. People avoid that station.
Yes. Okay. I wonder if you've tried, thinking about. Obviously, you can now get, for example, AI cameras that can count the number of people going through in a fairly unobtrusive way. Councils have done this sort of thing for like footfall in high streets. I don't know if you've thought about using that as a way of getting a more, you could compare how many people tap through versus how many people walk through.
I'll caveat that we're looking at a whole series of different initiatives, particularly for the next franchise. As Tom mentioned earlier, I'm not going to give all of the information away at this session, but I'll let Tom talk a little bit about that.
Thank
yeah, it's something sort of we're really hot on across the whole business on fare evasion. And by that I mean all of TfL. It's one of our kind of key priorities. I mean, given sort of funding is tight, it's all the more important, but it's always been something that's important to us. And so there's a lot of work across the business about what we can do and how we can work better together. We don't want to, get really good at preventing it on the DLR and push everyone to another mode. That doesn't make any sense. So we want to work with the other operators, be they TfL or National Rail. Specifically on the question there, we have already automatic passenger counters at every station, so we know how many people enter and exit every station, and we actually think they're very reliable. We can cross-reference that, which I think is sort of what you're implying with the Oyster data. Of course, one of the challenges there is that there are a number of ticket types which don't require you to touch in and touch out. So just as an example, I don't need to touch in and touch out, although I do for other reasons, but I don't need to. So there are enough people who have that true as well. People with freedom passes is another good example. That means that it's not a perfect indicator, but it does give us some extra intelligence which we can use to say, well, let's go and check, let's go and run exercises there.
Okay, but you're pretty confident that it's sort of quite low, actually. So 1%, 2%, 3%, something like that. I don't know if that's low or high. It doesn't seem like vast numbers of people.
Those are numbers that we're getting. So yeah.
Okay. In terms of, this is just a personal observation of mine. Sometimes the little tap-in points are not obvious, not well signposted, not well positioned. So, for example, if you get off at Royal Victoria coming here, you have to. If you go up the stairs, there's one at the top on the left. Actually, if you miss that one and it's kind of tucked away behind, obviously it's brought your attention as everybody else is tapping in on it, hopefully. But if you miss that, it's very easy to miss it. I don't know whether that's something you've looked at, the prominence and position of the points.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of the reasons for the locations have been very much determined by where we could get power to on the stations. And in hindsight, perhaps we would have been a bit more deliberate in the placings of some of them. So one of the activities we've done, and we've got a trial in on Shadwell and one of the stations. Cyprus. So we've actually got projectors that project something onto the floor right by the validators so people can see them. But part of the reason for doing that rather than kind of a lower tech version of stickers is that actually we found that changing what people see is actually a bigger kind of aid to letting people know where they are, whereas a sticker quite quickly becomes wallpaper, or floor paper. We absolutely are akin to the idea that people are missing the validators and doing everything we can to make sure that we publicise them. And the trial seems to have had pretty good success rates in terms of additional taps. So it's something we're looking at rolling out more broadly.
Okay. So overall then, in terms of sort of steps being taken to tackle fare evasion, there's the sorry, I forgot what you called them, blocks?
Yes, revenue blocks.
Revenue blocks, possible changes to not signage, but projectage. And those are the sort of two main things, combined with the data that you have that suggests it's in the region of 1%, 2%, 3%, somewhere there.
Yes, that's correct. When we talk about the signage, nudges is the word that we use, so it's used across networks all over the world to try and influence passenger behaviour, so it's that type of thing. We also have dedicated revenue protection officers out on trains helping to check tickets as well, just to support the PSAs who do revenue checks as part of their normal role.
Okay, and in terms, I mean, obviously the nature of the network is, as you say, there aren't ticket barriers, the stations are unmanned, and so on. How does the level of fare evasion compare with, say, buses or the tube network generally?
I actually don't have the bus numbers with me, but we're happy to come back with those, absolutely. I think when we look at other ungated systems, I think we compare quite similarly if we look at sort of what we see on, for example, the tram network, or what we see on sections of National Rail that don't have kind of extensive gating. I would say that across all of TfL, we've worked very hard to bring those numbers down regardless of the setup. So, I mean, a really good example is if you look at something like the London Overground services, when we took those into house, those were largely ungated. Even the bits that are still ungated have seen a massive drop in fare evasion because you put the effort in, you have the ticket machines, you have the signage, you communicate to customers. So we do all of that all the time to try and make sure we're getting it as low as we can do. And I think the point Richard made about the staff on trains makes a huge difference as well. So you may not be being checked at a station, but for us, a big way of checking people is to have people doing checking while you're travelling.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I saw Assemblyman McCartney.
Yes, thank you. And it was that question on train revenue inspections, because I must say, I mean, I use the DLR nearly every day, and I'm regularly stopped. It seems to be that is the one mode of transport that does seem to have regular inspections on it. So you talked about having 6 or 7 that do the revenue block checking. Are the on-train inspectors additional to those?
Yes, on train inspections. So there are 2 types of people that do that. Firstly, the PSAs, the passenger service assistants. So they would, as part of their role, so they're opening and closing the doors and giving customers service advice as well. They also go around and check tickets. So that's part of their role. And the other part is dedicated revenue protection officers. So a team of 2 that will go around the network just checking tickets in addition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Berry.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure who the best person to answer, probably TfL people. It was really interesting to hear about you trying to make the tapping in and tapping out touch machines more visible. One of the things that I feel potentially we've not talked about today is people paying too much because they've forgotten to tap out. And that is obviously an issue too. Do you have any idea about how many people are affected by that and what you might do about it?
I don't have the data with me today. I'm happy to come back to you in terms of the absolute numbers there. But you're absolutely right. And Richard talked about the nudge marketing, and it's not just for one end of the journey, it's for both ends. So over the years, we have done quite a number of campaigns and emails out to people who've got registered Oyster cards, for example, reminding them of the need to touch out. And we try and do as much as we can with the staff that we've got out on the network to be part of that educational space.
Okay, great. And obviously, this is slightly above everyone in this room, but the DLR covers a limited number of zones. It does go from zone 1 into zone 4, but only very slightly at either end. It's mainly in zones 2 and 3. Have you considered asking TfL if you can charge a flat rate? The tram has 1 zone, so why shouldn't the DLR, is my question.
I mean, it's an interesting question. I mean, I would say that we are TfL, so we wouldn't consider asking TfL. We are TfL.
Sorry, but I mean the people in the fares. I'm thinking of Shashi.
Yes.
Shashi, yeah, no, essentially.
I understand that. I mean, I think there's always going to be a balance with any service, and I think I'd leave that to Shashi to sort of set out in more detail. In general, of course, you're trying to balance many things for the fare system, complexity and fairness and lots of other aspects, and it does, of course, cost us more when people are on the train for longer in terms of having the capacity to carry them, so we try and balance that out, but I think I'd have to refer to my fares and ticketing colleagues for anything more on that.
Okay, great. I mean, that opens up all kinds of possibilities, such as tapping on the train, you see, so that would simplify things a lot. Anyway, that's a suggestion for later, maybe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I now look to Assembly Member Rogers.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. We're moving on now to talk about expansion of the DLR network, and we've got a number of proposals. I'm going to be asking about the Thamesmead proposal. Not sure who the best person to lead with this is, but if someone could tell us what the current estimates of the cost are for that DLR expansion to Thamesmead.
Hi. So just to be clear, the Thamesmead extension would come a spur off from Galleons Reach, serve Beckton Riverside, under the Thames, serve Thamesmead. The current cost at today's prices is somewhere between 900 and 1.1 billion. That's not an outturn cost, that's today's prices.
Okay, fantastic. And to meet those costs, what additional investment is going to be required? What would you expect TfL's contribution to be? And what other partners would have to chip in?
So we have a great collaboration at the moment. So we have a delivery board that includes the two leaders of the council. So we've got Newham and Greenwich in there. We have the joint venture on the south side for Thamesmead, which is Lend-Lease and Peabody. And on the north side we have Aberdeen and a developer called St William, which is essentially Berkeley. Mm-hmm. So there's a number of things that we're looking at in terms of our funding and financing. We're not quite there yet. We've done some initial work. So things like land value uplifts, Section 106, development contributions. We also believe there's a revenue surplus as well, so that could potentially go through over time. But there is a gap. There's definitely a gap in the initial phases because the developments either side of the river are 30-year developments. Yeah. So the money's not there up front. So there will be a funding gap. We don't know how big that gap is at the moment, but that's something that we would be looking to government, central government, to help us bridge that gap.
Okay. So that gap, are there other options than central government, or is that that's going to be your go-to?
Central government have told us they are the funder of last resort, so we need to exhaust all avenues and see which ones are acceptable, political or otherwise.
So I know that TfL has submitted a strategic outline case to government for the next stage of that work. When will you hear back from this, and more broadly, what are the next steps for this project?
So we were hoping to hear in the autumn statements. It's just quite interesting actually and quite unheard of. We asked for a £6 million contribution to take the development of the scheme to a Transport and Works Act order, so we get our planning permissions to build and operate and maintain. And the partners and TfL were going to put in the other £6 million. We got 23 million back from government, but that wasn't specifically for the DLR. That was for a bus transit scheme, which you may or not wish to talk about somewhat later. In terms of the money that we're asking to get to Transport and Works Act, part of that money was for the bus transit development, so now we don't have to fund that money. That will come from central government. We are now looking for the partners and TfL to take this through to a next stage, and we're hoping to have more information about funding, finance, more detail on the costs, because we've got a bit more work to do to try to get those down as much as we can for the next spending review post-government election, so by March 2025 at the latest.
Okay, fantastic. That's all for me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Boff.
Those figures you've just given us, about 900 to 1.1 billion, I'm just curious how we come up with those figures. I'm quite. I know to my cost that the old proposal to extend the DLR out to Barking Riverside sunk because somebody in TfL came up with a sum of £700 million. I just don't understand how they come up with these figures. It was like 2 stops for £700 million. Could you perhaps explain how much of that money is contingency and how much is an accurate, a good estimate of what those costs will be?
Yeah. So we're at an early stage at the moment, so there is a fair amount of risk involved in that, and I'll talk about that in a second, if I may. You're quite right. In fact, you speak to some people and they say the costs are too high. You speak to some people and they say the costs are too low. If you take something like the Woolwich Arsenal extension, which is very similar, the cost per kilometre at today's prices was probably somewhere between 150 and 200 million. This is a 3-kilometre extension under the river, the same way that Woolwich Arsenal was as well. So one would hope that you could bring that in at similar sorts of prices, so that even if you said that was 3 kilometres, that would be 600 million. At the moment, we have a 40% risk allowance in there. We have a number of things that we think we can improve on as well. So we've got a turn-back facility between Canning Town and Poplar. We may not need that, certainly initially up front. That could be when further development happens at Thamesmead. We have a tunnel alignment that isn't quite as straight as it could be because there were some river wall issues, which we think we can get over. So the next stage is really working out, are those costs accurate? Can we do more detailed quantified risk assessment on each of those individual elements once we move to the next stage, have a bit more information? So we think they could be high, but at this stage they are a bottom-up estimate that's been provided by our consultants and contractors, and we have benchmarked those against other similar sorts of projects like the Barking Riverside extension, like Northern Line extension.
Well, that's not going to happen now, is it?
I mean, the overground that happened. Yeah. Also the Northern Line extension, although they are quite different beasts, an underground versus an LU system versus a DLR. So you're quite right to ask about the costs. We are looking to see if we can reduce those down.
Also, I mean, it's a long way off seeing another crossing, but is there some thought being given to unifying all these demands from TfL for a crossing in the east of London? Because each individual crossing's going to cost a gazillion, you know, we know that. But, whereas we know, for example, that in the very long run, there's probably going to be a crossing from Barking Riverside over to Thamesmead area. I mean, you can see the design, you know, you can see where it's pointing, and you know that ultimately there's going to be one. Rather than individually coming up with their each type of mode of transport coming up with their own crossing, is it about time we thought about getting a crossing that was multi-purpose and working towards that? At least it would save a bit of money.
Certainly there's options within, when we spur off from Galleons Reach and go towards Thamesmead, Beckton and Thamesmead, there's an option for then not precluding an additional spur if you wanted to go to Barking at some time in the future. In terms of the package, there's been a lot of work done about the package. So there was obviously Silvertown Tunnel, there was this crossing here, there was a potential crossing to the east towards Belvedere. We are focusing mainly on Silvertown Tunnel is actually be open in 2025, and we're now focusing on the public transport elements of that. That's not to say that you can't take your cycle across Silvertown, as you can, and you've got bus usage as well, and you've got pier crossings at the same time as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now have online Assembly Member Moema. Oh, is it? Oh, did you want to come in? Yes, sorry, you did.
Is it my question?
No.
Well, can I just raise something else, because it carries on from what... So I'm not
you want to come in on this section?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, it just carries on from what member sort of Boff asked you, panel, and good morning. I was going to ask you this later, but I think I should raise it now. So, Assemblyman Boff quite rightly talked about looking at things in a holistic manner and unified crossings, some sort of thought going to a unified crossing. So, do you think that in that spirit, there is a case for the DLR extension from Beckton to Barking Riverside? And indeed further out east, given the massive housing developments in that part of East London. And the reason I raise it now is, I know these things take years and years, but if elected representatives and I represent the area don't put our case down, then things never happen.
Yeah, so the overground extension obviously goes to Barking Riverside now. We have left a passive provision at the junction where we come off of Galleons Reach going down to Beckton Riverside. We've left passive provision to go to Barking Riverside if that was required in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Sorry, the next question actually going to be Assemblymember Joanne McCartney.
Yeah, thank you. And it's just building on something Assemblymember Rogers was asking earlier about the current plans for extension. So you've now got some money for the bus transit scheme that was in the autumn statement. Got the proposal for the extension to Thamesmead. At what stage will you start public consultation on any of those plans, and what would be the timetable for those?
Yeah, so in terms of public consultation, the only way the public, we've obviously got the websites, but we had the opportunity area planning frameworks. We had Beckton and Royal Docks, and we had the Thamesmead, Abbey Wood OAPFs. But transport was quite a small proportion of that overall consultation. So absolutely, as part of the engagement with the public, but also as part of the planning process, we have to go through consultations and engagement. It will be a continuous thing. We are looking to go to public consultation very early in the new year. So if you invited me back in a couple of months, you'd probably be asking about the consultation. So we are just looking at the exact dates of that, but we are looking to go through quite shortly.
Good, that's great, because this committee might want to respond to that consultation as well. But we've talked a little earlier about the cost of these various schemes, which is obviously one of your biggest challenges. But apart from cost, can you see any other challenge that might scupper or delay your plans?
It's quite interesting, because when you go through this kind of process, probably the biggest issue, obviously, is funding. Yep. is a big issue. But you go through a Transport and Works Act because you may need a compulsory purchase order at some point. This is one of the unique things about this particular scheme, is that we have all of the landowners and developers in the camp from the very early beginning. We've got them putting money into the scheme development, where we don't really do that certainly at the start. There's very little impact on sort of houses and homes outside of those areas. So I think that's a real kind of plus point. So we would hope that we wouldn't get too many objections to this scheme. Although Barking Riverside extension of the overground had one objector, and it went to a public inquiry, and that objector wanted it to go further. So there's always an issue of objectors coming up, but we've got everybody kind of in the camp, really. I think the biggest issue is the funding by far.
Okay, thank you. I've got nothing further, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. We've got some questions on the new trains coming up later, but can I just take this opportunity to thank you for the visit last week? Very impressive indeed. And I must say, I'm a big fan of the DLR, and I've got to be, because just under 90% is in my constituency of City and East London, and the continuing expansion of DLR for me means recognition of London's continual move eastwards. So my question is really about this proposed new station, Thames Wharf. So has any progress been made to secure funding for the new station that is planned for Thames Wharf between Canning Town and West Silvertown? And when would you anticipate that this will be built?
So I think we're working on like a whole package of different improvements around the Royal Docks area. Pontoon Dock is one of those to support housing development just north of the Pontoon Dock station site. There's also been talk of work here at Royal Victoria, and a new station at Thames Wharf or Thameside Wharf, or whatever it's currently named. All of those require funding, and I don't think at the moment we have a funding package together that can deliver all of them. There's continuing work happening on defining what that station would look like, and to reference the earlier questions from Assembly Member Boff, we're obviously looking to reduce that price as much as possible and ensure that it's an accurate and realistic price, so that if the funding were available, we could get on and build it. It is somewhat tied to the Silvertown Tunnel project, so you want to make sure that obviously that land is suitable and ready to be developed, because it's to support housing in that area, and that doesn't sort of make sense until that's done. But as Matt said, we're quite a long way along with that now. But to answer the question directly, we don't have a funding package at the moment to deliver that.
So I think in response to an earlier question, I think it was Matthew said that central government's view is that they will be funders of last resort. So have you had any talks with any developers who are prepared to fund the station?
So absolutely, we're engaging with the developers who would be part of that site there, but at the moment it doesn't look like there would be sufficient development contribution to pay for the station outright. And of course, we have our own funding challenges in TfL, and as you mentioned, national government have priorities of where they do and don't wish to invest. So, as I say, we haven't yet been able to pull together something that will pay for the full cost of the station. I should just quickly say that when we talk about things like this, and the same with Thamesmead, you can think it's just talking about the physical assets that you can see, a station and a bit of track or something if it's an extension. But of course, there's a whole lot of software changes and signalling changes that can be a bit harder to see, but still are a substantial portion of the cost. So that they can be a bit higher than you perhaps expect from looking at the materials alone.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to push you on this point because obviously these stocks are sensitive as well. But there are developers, at least one developer, who potentially would be interested in helping to pay for this station.
Yeah, as Tom said, we're absolutely working actively with developers because we see that as a key way to establish funding for this. So we'll continue to do that.
I've spoken to one of them, that's why.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. So, Assemblyman Berry, you want to come in?
Thank you very much. So I sit in this building in my office looking out over the Silvertown Tunnel site and where the Thames Wharf station would be. Very, very keen to see it built. And obviously the Silvertown works are going on. I can see those happening every day as well. Now, personally, I think the Silvertown Tunnel itself ought to become a DLR link, but in absence of that very sensible idea, I do want to see that station opened. Now, as I understand it, within the Silvertown Tunnel works and the contract, there isn't that much going on that would be preparation works for the new station. That's kind of been stripped out of the Silvertown contract. Why is that? Why? Because these are both TfL projects. They're going to be. Why wouldn't we be just putting a little bit extra into the Silvertown contract to make the next development, which we really want to see, more secure and more inevitable, and actually do that preparation work?
I'll kick off, and I don't know if this is the answer, but I was involved a bit in the plan of the Silvertown Tunnel. That's obviously a PFI for just the works at Silvertown Tunnel, so changing the contract.
Well, that's my question. Why obviously, when these are both TfL schemes, could you not introduce a variation to secure the... I mean, it doesn't even have to be a variation. Why wasn't it there from the first?
Yeah, I think a variation at this stage would probably be not the right thing to do. It would probably cost more money, but I think they would at the time. I think the Thames Wharf was hoped that it would be funded by government actually, and we would utilise that money, but that wasn't able to be taken up. So they would both look to be delivered, but they were separate mechanisms to do them, which we both thought were able to be utilised.
So you're sort of saying that because it's a PFI contract, because it was planned before the government decided, before the government still haven't decided whether to help us fund it. It just has to be you have to act like it's never going to happen when you do the Silvertown works.
No, I don't know enough about it. I was just giving my opinion on the my reasoning for the Silvertown Tunnel works, because that was a separate PFI initiative.
Okay. I think, as Assembly Member Desai said, we need to be looking long term when we're looking for planning these things, and I completely take your comment that it doesn't feel necessary that that's what we've done in this case, but we're continually working across our various funding routes to see the best way to take projects forward, which sometimes means that, in this case, the PFI was for the Silvertown Tunnel exclusively, and we thought we had a different route to the Thames Wharf station, but hindsight gives us a vision that says perhaps we could have looked at them together at the time.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Cheers.
Garrett.
Just a quick final thing on extension. Obviously, we've talked about the specific ones that are in the pipeline, but thinking about what the original idea was with DLR, obviously it's elevated track, so you don't have to have surface, ground, or underground tunnelling, so it reduces cost, and you've got this modular sort of station approach, and obviously that made it fast and cheap to deploy compared with say our beloved Croydon tram or underground. Not just in terms of extending the existing network, but are there other parts of London where that approach to developing a light railway might be able to provide new connections? And I suppose I'm always particularly interested in sort of orbital links in outer London, which I think generally aren't well served. blank sheet of paper, look at the map of London, what possibilities exist?
So obviously we've spoken about the DLR Thamesmead. Another option was not this area of London, West London. It's an overground network rather than the Docklands Light Railway. So we're looking at the options for connecting the overground between sort of Hounslow, Old Oak Common, Brent Cross, Coningdale, Cricklewood kind of area. And we're working very closely with the West London Alliance, which is a group of 7 local authorities there. It's at a very similar stage to the DLR Thamesmead scheme, probably about 6 months behind. So we're looking to go through a sort of single option process sort of mid next year.
That's overground rather than the DLR thing. So I don't know whether perhaps I've not painted enough of a blue sky sense of the question. Are there other parts of London where, because obviously there was no DLR. Somebody looked at East London and went, "There's going to be a lot of development here. DLR is the way to unlock that using this very fast, modular, cheap way of putting in a railway line." I mean, are there other parts of London where that approach might have merit, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly in terms of the DLR, this is probably not the only extension that could go ahead. And I think probably at the other end, at the bank end, you could probably there's a case for extending that further. Places like Euston, for instance, you could do something there, but it's not a priority for us at the moment. The reason we looked at Thamesmead is because you've got the developable land that just won't happen without it. So that was why that is our priority. But there are a number of other extensions that could be taken forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. I see a lot of nodding and chin stroking, but nobody committing to a line on a map. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now look to Assemblyman Baker.
Thanks, Chair. My questions are on, I've got a couple of questions on the new rolling stock programme, and again I'd like to thank you all for the visit. Was it last week? I can't remember, but it was very, very interesting, and I've got over my upset about the trains not being read anymore. But firstly, before I ask the questions that we've prepared, obviously there's been an announcement on capital funding this morning, and I understand that TfL asked for 500 million in capital funding, and about half has been given. Can you clarify whether this is going to have any effect on the delivery of the rolling stock, and because it was quite late, whether there's any impact on procuring the rolling stock, or whether that's all in train, as it were?
Well, as you'll appreciate, the information has literally come through this morning.
Yes.
So at the moment we're going through, we're already well underway in our business planning process. So actually we just need to work through the level of funding we've been given versus our expectations and what that means. But we were quite explicit when we were discussing with government what the funding would look like about some of our core projects, of which the DLR new trains were one, but also the Piccadilly line upgrade, for example. So yeah, we're continuing through our business planning process and seeing what the impacts will be for us. Now we know what the number is.
So there might be one. I do appreciate it is this morning. So since it's half, presumably various people are sort of going, no, I need it, I need it, I need it. So there's potentially going to be an impact on DLR. I don't want to. I'm not
genuinely.
Asking you.
Obviously, I've been in here this morning, so all I know is that we're putting it through our ongoing business planning process.
Do you have any idea when that might be clearer, and maybe we can ask for?
So there was a preliminary discussion with the board last week around business planning, but I guess in light of the announcement, that will need revisiting. So I would imagine early in January. So of course we'll make sure that that's shared with.
Thanks very much, and I do appreciate. Yes, first thing this morning this came through. So, so more generally on the rolling stock programme, so it's adding a new fleet of 54 trains. So can you take us through what additional features the new trains have? Who would like to do the?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think perhaps the most important thing for people is, that they allow us to run all the additional services. That sounds sort of a bit separate, but it means we're replacing it with more trains, and of course, as I've said, the current fleet are coming towards, or have in fact reached, the end of their kind of economic life, and so having these allows us to not only continue running, but of course run much more services for all the reasons we've talked about today. So specifically looking at the vehicles, I mean, for us, they benefit from the fact that time has moved on since we last bought trains. So you have much better customer information, much better spaces for people with disabilities, because of some of those benefits such as door lighting and customer information, more clear announcements, CCTV that is sent back to the control room in an emergency. That means there are lots of different people who will benefit from that, be they disabled or not. There's also air conditioning, which I suspect is increasingly becoming a kind of expectation for new fleets of trains, not least because of the sort of very hot summer we've had. And we're also providing, through the new trains, a walk-through vehicle. So at the moment, if you use the DLR, you'll know that it's sort of 2 or 3 sort of little trains, that's the technical term we use, by the way, coupled together as one larger train. Now that's great because it makes it very flexible, but it has the downside, of course, that there's sort of dead space between each section, and it means one of the best things about the new our service that we keep with the new trains, other than being able to sit at the front, which we also keep, is that you have a PSA on the train, and that's someone you can talk to on the train. Well, this makes that much better because you'll always be in the same bit of the train as them, because it's all one long bit, whereas at the moment that cannot be the case if you happen to be in sort of the other or one of the other sections. So that's some of the kind of big improvements. Naturally, they kind of perform differently and better, and they should be more reliable, but of course we hope customers don't sort of really notice those things. We hope that they notice the kind of more kind of customer facing elements of them, the more pleasant and more comfortable journey.
Thanks. And you sort of answered my next question, which was going to be, so what will happen, you know, how will this change the experience for passengers? So, you know, I think you've sort of said it's going to be more accessible, the information's going to be more accessible to people, more likely to be able to get the member of staff on train. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that? You've pretty much covered it, but in terms of the experience for the passenger.
I mean, there'll be some, we're not going to do it on day one, because obviously when we get the trains we sort of have a period, as we're already going through, of sort of testing them, and then when we do put them into service, we start with just sort of substitution, so taking a train out and putting a new one in. But over time, as we rack up more and more trains successfully delivered, we'll be increasing the timetable, so customers will see not only kind of more trains, but they'll also see some through trains that they don't currently see. So we'll see much more of Stratford through to Lewisham, which is a plus. So sometimes that currently only happens in the peaks, and it's only every other train, but we'll have all trains going through. And similarly, if you're on the Beckton branch, which we all are right now, then your trains either stop at Stratford International, or they stop at, sorry, that's not true at all, they stop at Tower Gateway, or they stop at Canning Town, and we'll be extending those Canning Town trains to go to Stratford International. So that's a very practical benefit the customers see. Again, will they associate that with the new trains? To some extent, we don't mind, as long as it's useful for them. The existing trains will also, of course, see those service changes. It's just we'll have enough vehicles to be able to make that work overall.
Thanks. That's really helpful, and I declare an interest in the through train from Beckton to Stratford International. Less time standing on Canning Town, I think, is good for everyone. And finally, what's going to happen to the current trains? Do you have any plans for the current trains once all the new trains come into service?
Yeah, it's I mean, I don't want to get too emotional about them, but it's
you're going to put one in your back garden, is what you're saying.
I would love to do that, but unfortunately, they really have reached the kind of end of their life. So there have been other instances where we've been able to take fleets and move them somewhere else, be that kind of internationally, as was done with early DLR trains, or the Isle of Wight, of course, famously had London Underground trains. But we don't believe these have any kind of meaningful economic life. Yeah. Frankly, if they did, we would have kind of invested in them to keep them going a bit longer, and we've done, we think, everything we can reasonably do in that space. Yeah. We are, of course, keen to find anyone who's interested in preservation or can use them for community purposes. Trains can be difficult. I mean, they obviously are heavy things to move, and they can have materials in them that make them kind of hard to just use for general purpose. So we want to make sure we're doing anything that we do it safely and we do it in the right way. If we can find someone to take some of them off us, we'll be only too glad. Otherwise, the remainder will be scrapped, and they're scrapped through a scrappage contract to ensure that they're disposed of safely and as much of the material is recycled as possible.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you.
Sean wants to buy one. How much are they?
Perhaps you can let us know. I'm now looking to Sem Moema, who's coming in online. Sem, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really sad to hear that there's only going to be one front of the train that you can pretend to drive now. It's my childhood self. So I wanted to ask TfL how the testing of the new trains is progressing, how that's going.
So first of all, the most important thing I will probably say today is that there'll still be the same numbers of fronts of the trains that you can actually see out of. Obviously, you could previously look inward towards the coupler, which if you're interested in trains like me, you probably did sit in, but if you want to look outside, you'll still have that at both ends of the train. So that was one of the very few things we input specified in the new contract, so I can assure you that's still there. On the question about new train testing, I think the most important point to make about new trains and new signalling, which there is an element of for this, to be clear, and depot work, is that they're difficult. And we went into this project knowing that those things are difficult and they require a lot of work. The train testing so far is going well because we're testing and we're finding out things, and then we change what we do because of that, and then we test again. And this is sort of very standard practice when you're testing new trains, particularly when you have automated signalling. You see how they respond. You have, normally use some form of custom software for that train. You learn from that. You change the software, you test again, and repeat and repeat and repeat. And so it's quite a slow and intensive process. It can be quite grueling, but we're doing, I think, the right thing, and I think it's going well. The thing that we can say with absolute confidence is that the most important bit is that the trains are safe and reliable. So we do all the testing necessary to get us there, and if we need to do more, we'll do more. And I should say we still believe we're on track for spring of 2024, the first train in service, but we'll just keep testing until we get to that point of confidence. We know from lots of other new trains, be they on TfL services or across the UK national railway or across our international friends, that you can have problems with them. So we're very aware of that. We're very ready for that. But the thing for customers, they don't want to see a glossy train that fails. They want to see a new train that's reliable and safe and dependable. So that's what we're absolutely committed to.
Okay, thank you. You've actually anticipated my next question, which was when they're going to come into service. So the first ones will be spring 2024. So when will all 54 new trains be in service?
Crumbs, I actually should remember this, but I actually don't remember this perfectly. It's definitely within the financial year 2026-27, but I don't remember the exact date. I'll follow up with you after the committee.
Okay, and just so it sounds like it will be a phased introduction in between 2024 to 2027. So do you anticipate any gaps in provision? So as you're taking out old trains, are you going to be replacing that? You're going to be starting new trains before you take out the old trains, for example?
Yes, that's absolutely the intention, is so that when we start with a one in, one out. So as a new train passes its acceptance, it goes through, particularly the first few trains, a very intensive testing process. It has to run in what we call reliability proving, and what that means is you're running the train amongst other trains that are in passenger service, but the new train is not in passenger service. So it's simulating what it would be like if it was running normally. We just don't have anybody on it in case, of course, we have any problems and have to take it out of service. Don't want to frustrate those people. So we have to do a lot of that. As soon as they pass that, they can then be brought into service, and then we would withdraw the equivalent amount of trains, which is 3 of our current trains, because when they're coupled together, 3 of them together, they make the same length as one of our new trains. So we withdraw those 3. Over time, we start deliberately accumulating a bit of a surplus of trains once we're confident in them running, and then we'll look to make timetable improvements, so be that train lengthening or frequency increases. But at the start, the principle is a one in, one out process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Boff, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I think on one of the questions you kind of answered, which is how long is a train? So you're saying it's not 5 carriages, it's the equivalent to 3, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
So each one of those 54 is going to be
That's right.
3.
So each one of those 54, that's exactly right, is the equivalent of 3 of today's like individual vehicles. Now, we never run those vehicles as individual vehicles on their own today. We run them coupled together as 2 or 3 car trains. But this will be a full-length 3-car equivalent train. It happens to be, because of the realities of coupling together a train permanently, 5 cars long. But customers need never care how many cars long it is. It will always be the full length of our platforms. In fact, if you're really excited, 30 centimetres longer than our current trains. But that's a trivial difference that won't make any difference to people. That's just a reality of the way it's been built.
So that's the maximum length of train that you're gonna put on that.
That's right. Yeah.
The smallest platform plus 30.
It's actually sort of longer than our smallest platforms, funnily enough, because some of our platforms are not full length. So Galleon's Reach, for example, can only safely dock a 2-car train. If a 3-car train stops there, what we do is we only have some doors open. And that will continue to be the case with the new trains. Be much more obvious to customers, though. Cutty Sark's another good example of that, because there are green and red lights above the door, and it'll be very clear this door isn't going to open, whereas another door is going to open.
Now, I know that there'll be, obviously there's competitive tenders to come in here, but how much would I have to fork out for an old DLR train?
You know what? I don't know the answer to that. Well, we'll have to come back to you on that one. But
you're going to stick them on eBay?
That wasn't our intended route of disposing of them. We were intending to go through a scrappage supply, and if that sounds a bit killjoy, the reason for that is just because we need to be absolutely sure that the materials are safely disposed of and safely recycled. We don't want someone to buy them for £5 and dump them in a river or something.
But we've got no figure currently for how much it would cost. We would get for.
I have to say I would be making one up if I said one. I don't want to do that, so I'll have to find out and tell you how much we're currently.
I'll give you a £5.
Yeah.
Cheers.
I'll take it.
It'll cost a few £100. Great. So me now to TfL. When will the preparation works for the new train fleet, such as the sidings and entrance at Black, will be complete? And have there been any significant challenges in completing this work?
So that's a good question. So let me start. There's a lot of work that has to happen at the depot. So we very roughly, if you think of the depot at the moment at Beckton, some of you will have seen it, but even if you haven't, it's a big train shed and then a load of sidings. And the sidings are where we store most of our trains. We store a small number at Poplar, but most of them are sort of Beckton. So for us to accommodate having a lot more trains, we need to have a bigger place to maintain the trains, because there'll be more trains needing maintenance at any one time, and we need more space to store the trains when they're not actually being maintained but are just being kept somewhere, generally speaking, overnight or at weekends where there's lower demand. So we are roughly doubling the size of the depot building, the actual bit where you maintain the trains, and we're adding a load more sidings, and that includes significant land purchases north and south of the existing depot footprint, the southern one funded by the Housing Infrastructure Fund, as are 11 of the new trains, in fact, funded by the Housing Infrastructure Fund. So that's been a very good example of working successfully together with DLUHC. How are they going? Generally speaking, these things are difficult, and they've been going okay. We had a rather unfortunate turn of events a few months ago when Buckingham Group, who were our principal enabling contractors, in other words, the people doing all the work to get the depot sites ready, they went into receivership, or into administration, I should say. So that caused us a lot of contractual issues and also kind of practical work cessation issues. So we're recovering from that. We're trying to work as quickly as possible, but obviously within the confines of kind of procurement regulations to make sure we get that up and running again as quickly as possible. And I should say that enabling works, it might sound kind of dull or kind of low-key, but at a depot site, when you're taking over new land that was previously industrial sites, there's a lot of work to be done before you start piling and sticking a new depot building in. The nature of the site is quite constrained, means that where we're putting the new depot building, we currently have sidings where trains have to sit at night. So we have to move and build new sidings, which was all being done by Buckingham Group, enable those sidings so they're connected up to the rest of the network before we decommission the existing ones and put the new depot building on. So that has caused us a concern, has caused us a problem, but I think we're doing everything we can to work through that, and it's been some really good working between the project team, between KeolisAmey Docklands, and between our team to say, well, how do we keep things like train assembly going despite not having the facilities as early as we were hoping, and I'm really pleased with where we've got to on that.
Has that had any sort of impacts on the service at all? I think there's issues around the northern siding of Beckton. Yep.
No, not any. It's not had any customer-facing impacts. We have to do some things differently to prepare, so we can both run the train. Assemble the new trains, and of course manage the existing trains. We sometimes outstable trains at the moment, which is where we have some trains not at the depot, not at either depot overnight, but instead in platforms, and that causes some challenges. But operationally, that's had no impact on the customer experience. Richard, do you have something to...
Yeah, I was just going to echo that. That's had no impact on our current operations. The outstabling point that Tom raises, we do that quite regularly for works, etc., etc. So that is a normal practice that we will do. As the work's continuing in the depot, we've had to outstable more trains. But again, that's part of our normal operation.
And have there been any additional costs because of all this?
So we think the costs to complete the scheme are likely to rise. It's difficult to say at the moment how much of that's due to additional inflationary pressures that obviously we've all been experiencing over the last year, and the insolvency of the Buckingham Group. But we're working through that to be able to confirm the additional amount of funding required during next year.
Thank you. Assemblyman.
Yeah, just one quick question. It sort of blends the expansion section we just done with the rolling stock section, and just thinking about the depot expansion. Let's imagine a wonderful future world where there's a big new DLR extension or even a medium-sized new DLR expansion. In terms of the depot space that would be required to support that, is this current expansion that's happening at Beckton enough to support that, or would you then need, is there further scope to expand there, or would you need to add a new depot somewhere else potentially?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the honest answer is it depends on how big an extension it is. We've always got to balance really carefully, because it's absolutely right, we want to be forward thinking and prepared to make sure that we don't sort of have abortive kind of costs from having to sort of go back in and do something, but equally we don't want to spend lots of money on something that never gets used and is just sort of a kind of white elephant extra space. So we try and balance that really carefully. We have enough land in the southern sidings for a small number of additional sidings. We actually haven't confirmed the exact numbers of sidings we're going to deliver as part of the southern sidings, just because practically it's about we know how many we need to deliver the day-to-day train service, and then it becomes what's kind of practically most deliverable and sort of most efficient to put in. But the point there is some space for a small number of extra sidings. That would almost certainly be enough for us to do, say, Thamesmead. But it wouldn't allow, a large extension to the west or something. But as Matt said, we're focused. We're always trying to be forward focused, but we're also realistically focused on what we can see a funding pathway to. And for us at the moment, that's Thamesmead. So we try and make sure that Thamesmead is as protected as possible in what we do, but not for any potential future extension.
Understood. Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And I look to Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much. So we're moving on to talk about safety. So whoever would like to answer this, I'd like to know, what do you think the key safety risks and challenges that there currently are on the DLR network? Does it face different safety risks and challenges compared to other forms of public transport? And from what you said earlier about the older trains, are there any safety risks that you're currently managing with the older trains?
Shall I start off from a kind of a TfL context and what you're saying around kind of where the risks sit? And I think it's fair to say that the majority of risks across the DLR are very similar to across all of our rail modes. So platform train interface, where people are getting on and off of the trains, is the biggest risk across all rail modes. It's obviously where people are most likely to have an issue in that space, and something that we monitor, obviously. And I'll leave Tom and perhaps Richard to come on this, but we have a different operating model on the DLR, which makes that a slightly different risk. Other risks that we see across the rail networks are slips, trips and falls. And again, we're working across TfL operations to see if there's some consistent messaging that we can get out in that space. And actually we've had some really good social media campaigns across London Overground recently about standing behind the yellow line and about not impeding the doors, and I think lots of that messaging translates. Obviously we've also got some of the risks that we see as more societal background in terms of we had a really nasty incident on the DLR last night, actually, where there's a stabbing on train between Greenwich and Cutty Sark. So those type of issues, we're seeing more of them across the whole transport network. But I'll hand over to Tom to talk a bit more detail around the specific DLR risks and where they differ slightly.
Yeah, so I think I really strongly agree, I mean, not just because it would be career limiting to disagree, but I strongly agree with Trish, because what we find when we're talking with our kind of fellow transport modes across London, including those that are not run by TfL, it is always how common it is rather than how different it is. So there are some areas, for example, and it's very unsafe thing for people to do. Some people deliberately kind of train surf, it's referred to, where people hold on to parts of the train while it's moving, the outside exterior of the train. Clearly not at all safe thing to do. But we find that we're not the only people to experience that. That's experienced through some national rail operators, it's experienced some other stocks within TfL. So even though you might think, oh gosh, that must be a product of the particular configuration we have of our trains, it turns out to be something that's seen elsewhere and where we can learn lessons and look at things like safety campaigns and communication with schools and things like that, and try and be part of the overall kind of solution. I'm going to let Richard just talk about I'm going to ask Richard to talk about smart CCTV in a second, because that's something we're trying to do something specifically on to try and help with safety risks. But the only thing I think I would say is that our system, we have to think all the time because of this, our system can feel very integrated into people's lives, which is a brilliant thing. But sometimes that causes people to do things that are definitely not safe, maybe on an unrealistic expectation about how the overall system works. So we do sometimes see people run across the tracks, particularly at places where the track is level rather than elevated. And that's a terrible idea on any railway, obviously. But it's a very bad idea on that kind of high-frequency metro service. And so we can put up all the signs we like. That probably isn't the thing that people think. They probably know it's not permitted, but they're choosing to run against it. So we try and work in the local community, work with the police to try and find other ways, particularly when it's people who are going to school, because that gives us another avenue for talking to people to say this is not a safe thing to do, to work with the community to prevent that. But Richard, it might be worth talking about what we're doing specifically.
I mean, my question was, sorry to interrupt. My question was about the risks that there are to get them laid out in advance of asking what you're doing about it.
Okay,
I have got a question about the smart CCTV in a moment. Is that all right? Or do you want to talk more about the risk that there is that you're mitigating rather than the technology?
I think I just echo the points here. It's very much like another railway operation, another metro operation. The two things that are different on our network, it's automatic train operation, so obviously we don't have a driver at the front of the train all the time, and also it's an open network, so with no gate lines, so the types of people walking on and off our platforms are not necessarily the people that have bought tickets and come on to the... So those are the two additional sort of hazards that appear on our network.
Okay, great. Well, that actually does lead me into asking about the older trains again. Things like door problems, things that might require somebody on the train to fix or warn people about. Are there any issues around your staffing model and some of the faults that are arising that mean you're perhaps having to staff trains that you wouldn't? Or anything like that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, because it's worth being clear that we do staff our trains. It's a core requirement of the system. There has to be someone. Literally, it won't leave unless there's someone on the train. And that's really helpful for us for safety and other reasons. It means that we've always got someone checking when the doors are closed that the train can safely depart. But also it means if there is anything that happens on the train, there's someone immediately there who can respond to it. That will be even better with our new trains because they'll be able to walk through the whole train. But PSAs at the moment, passenger service agents, that's the people on the trains. They already will move between different cars during their journey to try and make sure that they're kind of visible to as many people. But specifically, you asked that really important question because the age of our old trains, are we seeing sort of additional safety problems? No, I do not believe we are. We spend a lot of time making sure, and a lot of expense, in truth, goes into sort of maintaining them. It's one of the reasons for us to get rid of them is that they are not in the prime of life. But we would never put a train in service that we weren't satisfied was safe and met the same safety requirements as we would on, for example, our newer trains that are from 2008ish. So that's a non-negotiable. Then it's about how much you have to invest or how much you have to take trains out because they don't work properly in the morning.
Okay, great. So now I would like to ask about the new CCTV system and how that's being introduced and why. This is because of people on the tracks and incidents where people have been hit by trains.
Yeah, so as we said earlier, the fact we don't have a driver at the front of the train all the time means that we would like a secondary system to alert us to unauthorised people trackside, trespass, etc. So we started to do a bit of work with AI technology on CCTV, basically to say we've got 1,500 cameras around the network. Can we use some of those to alert automatically if there's obstacles on the track, or in fact we're also looking at whether, as Tom said, train surfing, people riding between the carriages, that can alert us to that to that happening. So. The challenge that we have is the quality of our CCTV. Some is digital, some is analog CCTV. We've run 2 trials initially. So we did one at Limehouse, which was difficult to get to work because of the analog CCTV, and we were basically getting too many false alarms to the control centre. It wasn't manageable. We've then run a really successful trial at Custom House with digital CCTV there. We've got a very low a number of false alarms, and that has been very, very effective. And we kept that trial running, and that's now used on a day-to-day basis in the control centre. Assembly members that visited 10 days ago would have seen that in action. We've been really proud of that. That's been a really good piece of work, and we're now going through the technical logistics and the funding logistics to try to roll that out network-wide. It's not trivial. It requires upgrading the communications backbone on the network, so it's not a trivial piece of work. However, we're doing everything we can to accelerate that and as much as we can to put that type of technology out all over the network.
Do you have any idea at the moment the funding requirement for that? You said you were working on it. Do you have an order of magnitude?
So the honest answer is it's really difficult to say, because we need to replace the what we would call the kind of fibre backbone, which literally just is what it sounds like it is. It's the sort of communication network that underpins the sort of non-critical, so not signalling information as it goes around the network. We need to do that anyway. So what we're now looking at is saying, well, when we do that, how do we ensure that we're as ready as possible to be able to bring maybe this is the right solution, maybe there are other things we want to do as well as this, but how do we make sure we're as ready as possible? So in some cases that means we install CCTV cameras that can be used with either a digital network or analog one, so we're kind of ready to switch over when the moment comes. We don't really have an indication of price, because even for the next station we're looking at, which I don't mind saying is Pudding Mill Lane, because that also has digital CCTV, we're seeing if it's possible to do it there. We're not totally sure of the exact cost of that yet, and we've actually got a piece of work undergoing at the moment, so we'd have to repeat that piece of work across the network. But it is going to be a substantial piece of work, and it will be slow. Perhaps sounds too negative, but the nature of rolling out the kind of the fibre back end is that has to work properly. It's absolutely critical that we, although it's called non-critical comms, we have to be able to see the CCTV, have to be able to make announcements to customers. So that's not something we kind of do in a rush. We do it like very carefully and making sure we've got a good contractor who we can rely on and builds us a system that will work for a long time.
Okay, that's really useful, thank you. And then can I ask about sort of broader changes to the CCTV, the current CCTV system in response to these incidents? Have you made any changes to the coverage of CCTV at DLR stations, or the way that the control centre works to manage and respond to incidents?
Not specifically that I can name now. I think the automatic detection is the main bit that we're working on in terms of improving the use of CCTV.
Okay, thank you. My final question is about retention times for CCTV footage, which is really useful for helping to solve crimes. There's a new focus on things like sexual harassment and abuse on the railway system that we're trying to get down as far as possible. When I last asked about retention times on the DLR, which was a while ago in 2017, I was told it was around 14 days, and the sort of TfL standard tends to be around, and the reasonable standard for sort of data protection and all of that tends to be around 30 days. So obviously 14 gives people a very small window to go and report a crime and for the police to recover footage. Are you working on extending that, or has it already changed?
I'm really going to be honest with you. I just don't know the answer to that. We'll come back to you on it, but I don't know, and I don't want to make it up.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, if you can let us know if there's one standard retention time, or if you're making changes gradually, that would be really, really helpful to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman, you want to come in?
Very simple question, really. How does your safety record compare to other modes of transport?
A simple question that has a massively multifaceted answer depending on what measures you're looking to define it across. So, as I mentioned before, when we look across TfL operations and looking across the rail modes, I would say DLR has a very strong safety record. But again, if you comparing each of the indicators would give you a different kind of measure in terms of where in that sort of league table it was of the other rail modes. So whether it had more slip strips and falls, whether it had more PTI incidents. So is there something kind of specific you're saying from a safety perspective?
Well, we're doing an investigation, or members of the group have been investigating safety on the bus network, for example, and they're not as safe as you think. So I was trying to get an idea of which mode of transport has per passenger mile travelled is the safest.
Could I just interject there? Perhaps you could, is there possible for TfL to do a comparator between the different modes and say...
I mean, if you haven't got it, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have anything with me today, but what would be really helpful, as I said, we have a lot of safety measures across the business, so we can do that for our KSIs, the key safety indicators, but if there's something specific that your group is looking for in that, so that we don't blind you with a very large table that's not helpful, that would be great to know.
I mean, as has been stated at this meeting, on every DLR train there is somebody there on each train looking out for the safety of passengers, and that's a very clear and reassuring statement that you've made, so thank you for that.
We'll drop you a line and then perhaps...
Yeah, happy to follow up on that.
Finally, Assemblyman Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. Just wondering, Trish, whether there's any sort of technological trials that are taking place in other parts of the TfL network that could then be used on the DLR network. Is there anything else going on in the sort of safety field that you're looking that could be used in the DLR?
Nothing technological kind of jumps to mind in terms of trials that are going on elsewhere, but as I've mentioned, one of the things that we are doing more than ever actually is looking across the TfL operations and seeing where we control something and where it has that read across. And certainly when you look at how the busyness of the DLR, actually there's a lot of read across from LU, so a lot of the customer behaviour, a lot of the incident types that we see and where they're occurring are quite similar, and we're keen to make sure that we are taking that approach and using one of the businesses as a test bed and rolling out those ideas. But there's nothing that springs to mind that's currently ongoing that we should be looking at.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. You've talked about the CCTV, and we obviously saw that when we came to visit, those of us who were there. But obviously the new trains also have other features in terms of preventing collisions. Do you want to talk about that sort of safety feature that will be on the new trains and how they're going to enhance customer safety?
Yeah, of course. So there's a few different features that we don't have, or at least don't have exactly the same on our current trains. So perhaps the most significant is that in the case of a customer pressing the emergency button, the CCTV footage will be relayed back to the control room. So just to be clear, there's still the passenger service agent on board. It's just there's another pair of eyes helping, and it means they can, of course, be communicating, being able to see something, or possibly something that the PSA, while busy dealing with a particular incident, might not be able to see. So it's an additional help for them. We have looked a lot at whether there should be on-train ability to spot in advance an obstacle and stop. When we went out to contract for those trains, we could not find a system that would be reliable enough that you wouldn't have endless false alarms. And that's obviously that becomes a system that then gets turned off, which is the worst of all kind of. It's like removing the battery from a smoke alarm. It's still like the worst of all possible solutions. So we haven't got that. We continually work on how could we do that? And in fact, to Trish's point, we've been working with our London Underground colleagues who've been similarly looking at whether there's a solution that works on the tube, and we're seeing whether it does. Is there a case for potentially retrofitting that in time? It still wouldn't currently be a good enough standard, but it seems to be getting much better than when we looked at the time of the trains being let. What we do have on the new trains is that if the train hits something, it will stop. And that might sound like a fairly low bar, but it's not the behaviour of the current trains. Exactly. And that's why we, of course, have CCTV monitoring the network. It's why we have the PSA on board. And it's why we also really communicate strongly with customers to say what to do if something goes wrong. So we've been putting a lot of effort in, and real credit to CAD here, for communicating at platforms where are the emergency alarms, making it immediately visible to customers and being very clear and plain in language about what it does. So going from it saying alarm, which is quite unclear, to emergency train stop, which I hope is very clear for people, because we do of course rely on everybody, if they see something that looks unsafe, doing something about it, be it our staff or be it members of the public or anybody else.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. And then finally, I wanted to ask you about technology, a different technology that you're trialling. Obviously, it's an accessible network, but for blind and partially sighted customers, you're piloting the NaviLens technology. What have you learnt so far from this? And is it something that is likely to be implemented elsewhere, either on the DLR, but also the wider transport network?
So a little bit about the technology. NaviLens is it's sort of like a QR code, a colourful QR code that's based around 4 of our stations at the moment, and it's designed to help partially sighted people. It also has the other benefit of it provides information, audio information, micro information about the station and navigating around the station in multiple languages as well. So not only for partially sighted people, but also for the huge diverse languages that we have on the network as well. So quite an exciting bit of technology. It's used on various transport networks around the world. It's also on Kellogg's packets of cereal as well. Provides information there, so you can see it on those. If you go through our stations, you will see these colourful QR codes, and essentially you scan them on your phone, and that provides the information. We're working with a series of focus groups. The RNIB has been we've been engaging with them to get their feedback and their reaction on that. We're just in the middle of that trial at the moment, so we can come back with any specific learnings, but we're right in the middle of that first trial at the moment.
And it's on 4 stations?
4 stations, yes.
Okay, and then depending on what comes out of that, sounds like it's relatively cost effective if it literally is sticking up QR codes once you've done the background stuff. Presumably you'll then be looking at potentially rolling it out on the whole network and maybe wider. Can you name the 4 stations?
Woolwich Arsenal, Cutty-Sark, Canary Wharf and Tower.
Lovely. Okay, brilliant. Well, I look forward to hearing that. That could be a really good development for the whole network. Lovely. Thank you. That's all the questions I have, Chair.
Right, well, I'd like to thank our guests for attending this morning and for their answers to our questions, and we'll have a few questions we'll send through, and we'll remind you of the other questions you said you'd write to us about. Thank you. I'd just like to wish the 4 of you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Likewise.
I hope to see you in the new year. You're welcome to leave now. Just a couple more issues. So can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussions?
Noted.
And can we also delegate authority to me as chairman, in consultation with my deputy chair and party group lead members, to agree any output arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we'll now take a short adjournment. We're ahead of time, so we'll make it a 10-minute adjournment. Okay, and see you in 10 minutes, which is 40 minutes, 10, 40, 11:40?
37.
Yeah, 11:37. Great, thanks. London Travel Watch's business plan for 2024-25. I'd like to welcome our guests. We have Arthur Leathy, who's the chair, London Travel Watch, Michael Roberts, who's the chief executive, London Travel Watch, and Tricia Hayes. Welcome, Tricia, who is our chair designate, London Travel Watch. But we're waiting for a formal appointment, but nonetheless, thank you very much for coming. Much appreciate that. So, I'd like to start with questions. My first one is, what has been London Travel Watch's most significant achievement over the past year? Michael, would you like to kick off with that? Or Arthur? Yeah, or Arthur?
How's that? Is that better? Good. Apologies. Yeah, I mean, just before I answer that question, Chair, if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind just looking back over the 6 years that I've been as being Chair, because I think the significant achievements we've had over that time sort of bleed into what we've done this year. If you cast your mind back to 6 years ago, which I know seems a very long time ago, I think London Travel Watch was quite insular, quite inward-looking in terms of the work it was doing, and I think often got referred to as following hobby horse projects that were of interest to us, perhaps, but not necessarily of relevance to the outside world. And I think the work that we've done, very much in cooperation and collaboration with yourselves, has been to change the way that we work and be much more outward-facing, working with partners, working with yourselves, working with Transport Focus, who you know we have a collaboration agreement with now, but also a lot of the major organisations around, such as Transport for All, the disability groups, the Bus Alliance that we set up with others, I think has put us in a position to actually achieve a lot more. We're a small organisation, but I think it's by working with others that we've been achieving more, and we've certainly been listening to people more than at any stage in the past. So that's just a bit of a background as to where we got to in the last year. Clearly we've had change in the sense of Michael joining us at the beginning of last year, which has been a great acquisition for the team, and I think the leadership that Michael's shown has been exemplary this year. We've had some challenges, but Michael's ridden those. So I think from my perspective, I mean, the real achievement currently has been the work we've done around the ticket office closures. I think that has set us up. We didn't have the credibility, if I'm honest, I think 3 or 4 years ago, to have got our message across in the way that we have done this time, working with Transport Focus and yourselves. I know there have been discussions in the past on that. I think what we've said has really mattered. It hasn't been us just thinking things through on our own. We've listened. We had over 250,000 responses, 280,000, a lot of responses. And by being able to coordinate those, I think we were able to send a very clear message to the industry, particularly. Your ideas haven't been thought through sufficiently well, and it's not that there isn't merit in looking at ticket offices and looking at the way we use stations, but it has to be thought through, and we need to think about the passenger. And I think, from my perspective, we've had that credibility to be able to put that message across, and hence why I think the government listened so quickly, actually, and made the decision to drop those plans. So I would undoubtedly say that was our biggest achievement of this year. But Michael and Tricia may have thoughts.
I would agree.
That's the kind of answer I like, Michael. Well done. Thank you. Okay, and what have been your greatest challenges, would you say, and where do you think you've had the biggest impact?
Well, I think actually the ticket office consultation has been simultaneously the biggest win and also the biggest challenge, given the scale of the response from the public that we had to process. Given the, I think, the degree of conviction within the industry that was the way to go, notwithstanding the fact that we felt that many of the proposals were a case of putting the cart before the horse. There were a number of preconditions that need to be put in place before those proposals, I think, could have worked well. So I think that has potentially been the biggest challenge we have faced. Just to build on something that Arthur said about it being kind of like the biggest achievement. I think, whilst I think that's correct, also we are very conscious that what we achieved in objecting to the proposals on the evidence put in front of us and the impact that that had in terms of the industry then deciding to withdraw those proposals, essentially what we have done is merely to preserve the status quo. And we haven't actually materially improved what is otherwise, often an average and sometimes a worse than average experience for the travelling public on the rail network in the round, and particularly for certain communities such as the disabled travellers. So it was a big achievement, but we're conscious that there is still an enormous job to do, not just on rail, but in other modes of transport as well.
Thank you. Did you want to speak? Okay. I think I'd agree with that. I think it's an amazing piece of work you did, actually. But I think the important thing now must be to press the industry to get themselves into a better position, so that if they do ever have to make that transition, hopefully they won't, then they're a better place to do it. Okay, just one other question. How do you ensure that Travelwatch is a critical friend of Transport for London without getting too close?
I'll just start on that, and I'm sure Tricia will certainly have ideas of her own for the future, and Michael will too. But just looking back again slightly, I think we were too close to Transport for London when I first arrived. I think there were a lot of meetings, but it was very much almost the industry talking to the industry, and we were considered to be the industry, and there were a lot of, it was almost shorthand. We knew what each other were thinking. And I don't think there was that level of challenge. I do think in the last, I would say, 2 years, and actually through COVID, I think we were able to challenge in a constructive way. We certainly pushed hard on the hygiene factors during COVID, and Transport for London were a bit resistant, I think, at first, but they moved on that, and they've maintained a lot of those improvements. But I think now they recognise that we are there as the passenger representative, and at times where they've perhaps had to focus on their finances for understandable reasons. Perhaps sometimes the passenger has been, I wouldn't say forgotten, but perhaps has taken a sort of a bit of a back seat. And I think we'll always maintain that level of pressure on Transport for London. So I think we've moved away from the cosy relationship. I think we're still considered to be friendly, but I think we've got to be critical where that's necessary. But Tricia, I'm sure, will have thoughts for the future.
Yes, just very briefly adding to that, Chair. And before I do, can I just say thank you very much to the Assembly for appointing me. I'm very much looking forward to being able to take up the appointment and getting going in this really important and exciting role. As a critical friend, I mean, my reflection on having been getting to know London Travelwatch is London Travelwatch exercises authority through the quality of its work. And it's much easier to be a critical friend when you're able to draw on evidence which is well-founded, based on good quality research, and that draws on insight which has some substance to it. And that's part of Arthur's legacy that I'm particularly keen to continue, that London Travelwatch is able to say things that are slightly uncomfortable because they're well evidence-based and they're well-founded. Thank you.
Thank you. Now look to Assemblyman Baker.
Thanks, Chair. I've got a couple of questions on the financial plans. Can I just firstly ask whether London Travelwatch's spending and activity this financial year has gone as planned?
For this year, broadly speaking, yes. So if I think about the three kind of key areas of expenditure, our biggest area of expenditure is on salaries, on staff and members, and we are absolutely in line with our budget. There is a very, very small underspend currently because we have provision for some professional advice on safety issues, which we haven't yet exercised, but it's of the order of £10,000. Second area, which are overheads, fixed and variable, the largest part of which is relates to property, but also embraces a number of other areas such as IT and various bits of consultancy, for example, on HR. We are trending just within budget. So we actually provided more in our budget this year than we did the previous year, and that was because we actually overspent against budget last year. So to be prudent, we increased provision for that. And we're just under that, so it's we're in the right place in that space. I should mention as an aside that we have renegotiated our lease for our office. The new lease started in November. We will see some of the benefit of that coming through for the remainder of this business year. Our rent will be about 12.5% lower than it was previously, which is obviously a good thing to have. In the short term, however, the legal fees that were involved in securing the new lease will counteract the reduced rent, but we will see the benefit flow in future years. And then finally, in terms of projects, this is the area of discretionary spend. We actually budgeted less this year than we did last year, and that was based on my judgment that we had underspent last year and we needed to plan for a run rate that was more in line with what we are able to do. But within that project spend, the biggest element that we had made provision for was to fund our work on ticket offices. In the end, we have probably come in under budget. Again, a right side failure, if I can put it that way. We're looking at ways in which we can usefully reallocate that money on projects before the year end. But overall, I would expect that we will come in within budget by the end of this year.
Thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you. Sorry, you said the savings on the lease will run through, improve in future years. Does that mean in this financial year coming, in this financial year 23-24, or later than that?
So it's a 3-year lease starting from this November.
Yeah.
So we will start to see the lower. We are paying now lower rent than before,
Yeah.
and we'll do so for 4 months of what is left of this year. That benefit will be offset by the legal costs in negotiating that lease, but obviously the lower rent will still apply for the next 2 financial years.
I'm asking, without asking exactly how much the legal fees were, is when will it start to roughly?
From next financial year.
From next
all of next financial year, all
Fantastic.
of the following financial year.
That's helpful, thank you. And so in your business plan for 23-24, you've identified that if there is a year-end underspend, and that will be used to build up reserves, which is absolutely prudent. Are you anticipating an underspend, or is that, are you going to budget for that, or are you just saying if it comes about, then that's where it will go?
We didn't budget for it.
Yeah.
We budgeted on the assumption that our year-end reserve, so the reserve by the 31st of March next year, would be broadly at the same level as the year previously, so approximately 100,000. That's what we budgeted for. In practice, as things currently stand, I think we will come in with an underspend. I don't know exactly how much. And as we've set out in the paper, our proposal would be to use that underspend primarily to help start building the reserve up to a higher level. That's right.
Okay, that's fine. And I mean, we're going to ask what the source of the underspend was, but I think you've sort of laid out in the 3 areas of the budget where things have come in slightly under and the reason for that. So I think we've asked that question. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Assemblymember Berry.
Thank you very much. I want to ask about the process of putting the business plan together and setting the priorities. In the document, it just says, we have identified 8 priority topics. It doesn't say how you went about that. Last year, I know you carried out consultation via the transport-focused transport user panel, which is a big panel of thousands of people. I'm not sure how many of them are London-based. But they answer surveys online. How did you go about deciding on these priorities? Or is that covered by priority 8, which is do more research into what people would like this year?
So in terms of the 8 priorities that are in the document, that was ultimately a judgment that we made, but the judgment was based on a review with the team, including our casework team, in terms of the issues that for example, in social media, we were spotting as trends. It was partly that, partly a judgment that there were projects and priorities that had been identified in the business plan that I inherited when I arrived, but which we haven't actually been able to take forward. So, for example, we had identified accessibility on transport as an area on which we wanted to work, and that we were going to identify where particularly we were going to try and be active in that space on the basis of analysis that other organisations were planning to do, but which hadn't been completed at that time. So, and our judgment was those issues are still very much live, and in fact, if anything, the ticket office consultation and the strength of opinion from disabled groups around the quality of their experience on the rail. If anything, I think it validates the sense that was still a topic that was worth pursuing. So there are some priorities which are areas that we hadn't been able to take forward previously, had been identified as work we should do, and which now we want to go back to. We have run these ideas through our board, and we have had the opportunity, very, very informally, to talk to a number of Assembly members, but very informally, just to sense check where our thinking was going, and that's the result that you see in front of you in the document. Now, I think that's I feel comfortable with that. Two things I would say. One is I think the time is right for us to go back out and survey the public, the travelling public in London about priorities, which is why we've identified it as something we want to do, and we want to do it early in the next business year. The second thing I would say is that in capturing the priorities that are in the document, there are other areas which we could easily have picked up and wanted to run and run with as well. So, for example, we haven't said anything about fares, which is a perennial issue of concern to the public, and where we feel we could do some useful work there too. But we felt it was sensible to limit our ambition, not least because there will be a new committee in place after the election. We would like to understand the priorities of that committee, and where possible to kind of add our resources to support the work of the committee. Once its priorities have become known.
Okay, no, all of that makes a lot of sense. I think, Tricia, you possibly want to comment on you as the incoming chair. Are you content with these, and have you fed into them yourself?
Thank you very much. Yes, I was keen to kind of come in this point, and I was grateful to have the opportunity to be involved in the kind of shaping of the priorities, and I think they're in the right place. But just two kind of super quick comments. I mean, one is just to reinforce Michael's point that this was not an easy document to get to. There was a much longer list of things that even just the people on the board, let alone everybody else we talked to, would like us to have worked on. And that we're very aware that there will always be things that we're not going to be able to get to in any particular year. But second, it is super important to us that we're able to be kind of dynamic in the way that the sector is dynamic. And we absolutely know now that there will be questions that you ask of us through the year, or particular trails you want us to follow. The new committee wants us to follow for it, and it's sensible, both kind of financially, to pick up the previous conversation, and also in our business plan, just to give ourselves a little bit of wiggle room to be able to be responsive without pre-committing absolutely all our resources before we've even started the financial year. So we want to be able to be pacey and fleet of foot, as well as having a strong plan for the next year.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. And then a slightly technical question about... Sorry, Arthur. Yes, please.
Just a sort of live, sort of get butt in there. But I think a live example really is the whole issue around personal security. I think the survey work that we did showed that up as really the third biggest priority of passengers, which we probably hadn't fully expected, if I'm honest, back in 22. And when we built on that and we did the first survey, that showed up, of course, that there was more work to be done. And we were interested about the response we got from British Transport Police and indeed TfL, that they geared up in terms of personal security, the bystander programme that they've set up, gave us, I think, a confidence that we were on the right issues here. So again, it's that adaptability and being able to move in line with what's actually happening out there. That's all. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So a number of couple of the priorities are about accessibility and inclusion, and that's absolutely fantastic. So my slightly technical question is, given so many people wrote into the ticket office's consultation raising issues around accessibility and inclusion, are you able to recruit them for future work? Was that part of the terms and conditions of writing in? Have you got permission to contact them again?
We're going to have to check that, but you're absolutely on the nose, because we were talking about that earlier this morning. Actually, what is the opportunity for us to somehow harness that wealth of contribution? But we do have to respect, rules around how we.
There are laws, yes,
exactly. If we can, we would like to.
But yeah, that's such a lot of people who are willing to engage and feedback, and it just seems like, let's keep them on board if we can. And then my second question, if I move on to that, unless there's follow-ups. One of the new areas that you've added to the business plan this time is greater ambition by TfL in building trust among customers. So I just wanted you to outline that and what you think the current levels of trust in TfL are and what kinds of actions you'll be looking at.
So TfL has a metric. It asks Londoners, all Londoners, and it indeed asks public transport users, the question: do you think TfL cares about its customers? And the score currently is 53% of all Londoners would agree with that statement, either strongly or somewhat. It's in our interests, given our role, to see a Transport for London that is trusted by the people who it serves. And our sense is that TfL does many things well, but 53% doesn't feel like a great level of achievement. And the target that TfL has set itself is 55%, which also does not feel particularly ambitious. Now, it begs the question: what does good look like? I mean, given an organisation of this sort, it may be that world beating might not be particularly high, but our instinct is it ought to aim higher. And indeed, when Andy Lord joined our board for one of our public meetings during the year, and we discussed this, I think my sense was that he too believes that the organisation ought to aim higher, but of course it faces many challenges. So we felt that this is something that is worth pushing on. So to understand what does good look like, what's the strategy behind improving that score, what should an ambitious target look like. TfL has gone a lot of analysis. Their understanding, their analysis suggests that there are 5 key drivers that sit behind that overall score, and this is in their regular reporting. And again, I think we would like to understand, well, what are they doing to push against those drivers, and which are the ones that are most likely to change. And of course, in asking those questions, we may reach a view as to, whether or not they're going down the right track or whether they need to be doing something differently.
Well, that's very interesting. Yes, we'll look forward to seeing all that work and asking you more about it later. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garrett.
Thank you. Just thinking about this question of trust in TfL, how damaging is it to sort of trust and confidence is the phrase I suppose we use with the Met, but to trust in TfL, where obviously they run a very large consultation, lots of people say they're not happy with what's being proposed, and then they go ahead with it anyway.
I think that does pose a big risk to the degree of trust in the organisation, and I think I referred in my earlier comments to 5 drivers that TfL have identified. One of those drivers, it's really, again, it's a statement that they put to the travelling public and ask, how far do they agree. And one of those drivers is the degree to which TfL communicates openly and honestly. Now, that's not exactly, related to how it consults on matters, but it's in a very similar space. And I think that score again is in the sort of 50%, 60%, and it feels like an area where they could do better.
So on the 5 key drivers then, so that's the closest they get. I don't think you said what they were, all 5. Perhaps that'd be useful to know what they are. But is that the closest that any of them gets to this potential perception of people being ignored?
That feels like the most relevant one. If you'll allow me, I mean, I can play back to you what I understand to be the 5 drivers.
Please, yeah.
But in TfL inevitably will understand this better, and I will relay them in order of their level of score. So the best score comes first, the best scoring one comes first. So TfL has helpful and friendly staff. TfL is an organisation I can trust. TfL is investing to improve my journeys. TfL communicates honestly and openly. And then 5th, TfL supports customers when things go wrong.
Yeah, so you can see how that sense of decision making has an impact, but it's not quite captured in any of those 5, is it? I appreciate they're not your 5. I'm not criticising you for them, but you can see that.
Indeed. I'm slightly reminded of my appearance earlier on in the year during the session on smart road user charging, and I think as part of that discussion, one of the points that I made then, and I think is still valid now, is that when it comes to new initiatives, whatever form they might take, I think there is ample scope for TfL to engage more in genuine co-creation, in working together with communities, rather than necessarily doing some great thinking of its own, presenting it, and then seeking approval for that. And I think that's part of the trick of addressing what you've identified as a possible risk.
Yeah, and I think that would help no end. I think there is that tendency you've just described to have their own brilliant idea and then explain to people and then be disappointed that not everyone thinks it's as brilliant as they do. Thanks, Chair.
Could I just add on that? I think it's what Michael says is absolutely right. I think there's nothing that undermines public trust, and it's a consultation process that isn't really a consultation process, and people say we're not really being listened to. To be fair, I think there was the occasion of the bus network in Outer London where that a lot of pressure was put back, including by ourselves, to say this hasn't been thought through, and there was a rethink around that. So, on those occasions, I think we have real influence, and that's what we'll continue to do. But there may be other occasions where that doesn't feel to be the case.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Pigeon.
Lovely, thank you. The business plan includes giving a greater prominence to the role of innovation in addressing challenges faced by transport in London. So what are the main areas of innovation that you're thinking have the most potential for improving journeys? What work are you looking at doing in that area?
Let me try and answer that, and then maybe Tricia would like to come in on this as well. I mean, our instincts are that there's enormous scope for innovation in all of its guises to improve the lot of the travelling public. I think traditionally one thinks of technology, but also the use of data. It's as much about process as well, innovation in how TfL, for example, engages with the public in coming forward with ideas, just touching on the earlier conversation, is as valid an area of innovation. And our instinct is that these are all areas on which we need to push further on. Sometimes it may not be about necessarily a new piece of kit. It may be actually simply about implementing a piece of kit or a process. I mean, to pick a very prosaic example that comes to mind, an issue that people have travelling around the network, particularly on the tube and the rail network, is lifts are out of order, and you only discover that when you actually get to the station, and it causes you much disruption. There is very simple technology which can allow lifts to self-report, so that this stuff can be known sort of in real time. And it's as much about implementing that stuff as it is about, wacky new ways of mining data in terms of use of transport. To be clear, I mean, we're at the early stages of understanding, well, which are the areas where we feel that there is opportunity, but we're starting with a wide landscape. I think it's fair to say.
Tricia.
Yeah, if I could just build on that, and I think I should fess up, this is a particular kind of hobby horse of mine that we've talked about getting into the priorities. But I mean, I believe pretty strongly that looking after the interests of people who rely on travelling in London is as much about making sure opportunities to get better are taken as holding organisations to account for day-to-day failures. And this is about kind of realising potential. And transport is a fantastically innovative sector, but that innovation doesn't always come from the traditional transport bodies. It's not always the kind of big organisations, either in London or nationally, that do all the fresh thinking. And there can be a bit of a tendency towards kind of a not invented here mindset sometimes, when other players in the economy or in society have a good idea. So I think it's part of our mission to make sure that where there are bright ideas out there, I mean, examples would be in ticketing or maintenance or kind of intermodal integration or catering or passenger information. I mean, there are lots of different domains of the traveller experience where there are things to learn from innovators, large and small, across the economy. I think we can help bring that thinking together and make sure that the experience for the traveller is as good as it possibly can be and doesn't miss out on the opportunity to learn from what other people are doing and thinking.
Lovely, thank you. And then sort of linked to innovation, but it's also your new priority of more seamless journeys. You want to try to get agreement on an action plan for managing micro-mobility in London. And lots of us, we see scooters, bikes everywhere, parked everywhere, causing litter effectively on the streets, causing problems, but also they are a mode that lots of people are starting to enjoy to use. So what conversations have you had with stakeholders around this? When do you think this could be agreed? What's your sort of timescale for that? Because it's a really important piece of work.
And so this is an area that reflects what we track going on in social media. It's the sort of thing that really does energise and exercise people. I can't give a straight answer to your question about what the timescale is, but my sense is that a significant part of this is about us pushing actually at an open door. Because my sense from our engagement with TfL is that they too would like to see, for example, a London-wide approach to agreeing the way in which, for example, hire bikes are provided, to try and address the issue of parking on streets that doesn't clutter the pavements and the like. So this feels like an area where actually there is, I think, close alignment of the key decision makers on where we want to go.
Well, I agree TfL, but really they're one of 34 odd partners, because you've got all the boroughs who all have different views on this and different thinking. And certainly where I live in Southwark, suddenly there are all these bays marked out for these with posts in the middle of the road and stuff suddenly springing up everywhere. Every borough's doing things slightly differently. Have you spoken to London councils yet? Have you spoken to any of the providers?
Not to the providers. To some of the providers, yes, but not in a particularly formal way. To the councils, not actively yet. And I mean, I should say that the plan that we put forward is very much work in progress. We need now to flesh out, some of the ambitions that we've set out in this document, and to engage more actively with some of the key players, as you said.
I think that might be a harder piece of work than you might think, because you and TfL may have a view, but there are so many other sort of subtle views around that. Okay, so that will be interesting to see. I wanted to ask about a couple other things. In the business plan, you talk about the survey you did last year, Southeastern passengers around the rail timetable. Are you planning to repeat that? And also, are you thinking about doing something similar with any of the other train operators?
At the moment, that isn't a plan that we have, but again, we will be looking out for how the latest set of timetable changes land, and if our sense is that there are areas where there are major concerns, then we would look to repeat that exercise.
Okay. Now, you've talked a bit about the accessibility work you're doing, and it's really good. I think you're working with Transport for All on a survey of disabled passengers' priorities. Is that right?
To be clear, Transport for All have recently published the results of their survey. I mean, it's national in perspective rather than specific to London, but they've identified 8 barriers to a positive travelling experience for disabled passengers. The survey was published, I think, just over a week ago, 2 weeks ago. We have a meeting arranged with Transport for All for January to go through that and to start to identify which of those areas potentially are the areas where we can most add value.
Yeah. I think it's always important with Transport for All, as you say, to work out where you add value.
Correct.
To theirs. That's helpful. There's lots. It'd be interesting to see actually some of their work. I hadn't realised it had already come out. So I certainly hadn't had an email on that. And finally, you've already touched on your work you've been doing on personal security, which is really good and topical. But also you have done work on digital exclusion. Just wondering. I know you wrote to the Mayor and the Transport Minister following your report on that. What else are you going to be doing in that space over this year?
One idea we had was to mirror what we did with personal security this year, was to carry out some research into what has actually been going on a year after the publication of our digital exclusion report, which will be February. That'll be a year on. So to survey what providers have actually been doing since we did that, and to produce a scorecard in the way that we did on personal security, which obviously highlighted those who are doing well, but by implication those who weren't doing so well.
I think that's an excellent idea. Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember McCartney, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of questions, and I'll roll them into one if I can. As a transport user group, how do you think you compare with others? And I'm talking particularly around perhaps, city, both in UK and abroad. And Assemblymember Pigeon asked about innovation, what TfL could do about innovation. But is there anything that you're learning from other transport user groups as to how they innovate to get better data or to put pressure on, and is there anything you would like to do?
It's a great question, which I'll attempt to start answering, but perhaps Arthur or Tricia might want to come in as well. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity since I've arrived to really get under the skin of that question. I think it's something which would be great for us to do, is to kind of benchmark ourselves against others in this space, whether it's nationally or internationally. I think. If I look at the nearest comparator organisation, Transport Focus, with whom we work closely, I think we can hold our head up high and compare ourselves pretty well. And I think the work that we've done on ticket offices demonstrates that although we're a much smaller organisation, we can punch our weight alongside them. But I think there's more that we can do to kind of understand where further we can go. In terms of innovation, just as an aside, this may anticipate questions which come up later, but as you'll know, we manage the appeals process for the travelling public on various modes, and we're just in the process of concluding the contract for the provider of our contact centre for people who call in. Fine. Well, we've been thinking about how we can improve in that space, for example, but perhaps I can come back to that later.
If I could just add, I think it's a brilliant question and so important. And I think all I would say is I think there's an opportunity for kind of London Travel Watch, given London's unique role. Given London's unique role, but to use our convening power to work more closely with other large cities across the UK. And I would say I haven't started yet, but I already have a sense that there are maybe micro, but there are some areas in which there are some innovations that other cities are seeing, which London can learn from. So the learning, I think everybody's got everybody has the potential to learn from everybody else is up to, even if it's on small things like signage or on micro things. I'm keen to build a strong community of cities which are keeping close tabs on what each other is up to and finding ways of making a better service for people using transport.
Yep, thank you. And I think also using the networks that are there, the capital cities links that are already there. So I recently went to Oslo. And it was about sustainability, but obviously public transport is a big part of that, and that learning and sharing is really important. But Arthur, I think you were
no, it is a really good question, and I think it's something we've thought briefly about and not really not challenged ourselves perhaps as much as we could in that area. I spent some time up in Manchester, obviously with the new Greater Manchester public transport system there. The integration, the efforts they're making towards integration are really moving at quite a pace, and I think there's a lot that we, and indeed in terms of how they're consulting with the public, I think we can learn a lot from that. And of course, you're all very well aware of the Commissioner in Manchester. He's got a lot of experience from London, but I think we shouldn't be closed to those ideas, as Richard says, that are coming from other cities. But I think it's interesting to think more widely in terms of international comparisons would be really useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Your business plan quite obviously includes a continued focus on better transport services, pretty much at the heart of what you do. So you've talked about like personal security, accessibility, building TfL's trust with passengers. Is there anything else you want to highlight, or do you want to expand on any of those that you'd be returning to, or is it a new next year?
So what we are looking to do is to build on the work that we've been doing recently on, when I say recently, the last couple of years on buses, and in particular we've been looking recently with regard to buses at the role that the important role that councils have in supporting the TfL bus action plan. We're currently looking at a corridor-wide approach, so taking bus routes within a particular corridor within London that crosses over a number of councils with potentially different priorities, both inner and outer London, identifying what are the issues and how those issues are being addressed between them in a way that hopefully we could generate some good practice that then could be replicated in other corridors in and around the capital. And it would be about extending that approach that we would want to focus on next year with regard to buses. With regard to rail and tube, the outlook, particularly on rail, in terms of the kind of bread and butter issues to passengers, which is just the reliability of services, doesn't look particularly good. Phrases like managed decline have been used by TfL, but you could equally apply it to the heavy rail network in and around London, as well as nationally. We feel our job is to make sure we give an appropriate degree of focus to, how performance is shaping up on the network, and the way that we instinctively feel we can do this is again to use, the wealth of official data that's out there, so we can aim off some sort of combination of those routes, or possibly even those stations in and around the capital where performance is particularly bad, and kind of look at the overlap with, well, which are the routes and the services which are particularly heavily used. So we're identifying where is the most likelihood of negative impact for the travelling public, and to focus our attention in spotlighting those issues and working with providers then to identify what is it they're planning to do about those.
Thanks. I think I'll leave it there, Chair.
Could I just...
I didn't know whether you're just looking interested or actually indicating.
Sorry, I haven't been clear enough. But I think there is a particular area around weekend travel. We've certainly seen since the pandemic a massive growth in weekend travel, and I think the industry still is wedded to the idea that weekends are a useful extra. And it's absolutely key to both to the industry and the network itself, but obviously to passengers as well. And I don't think anyone's really caught up on that. How we deal with that when engineering work is done, what the staffing levels are like at weekends. We know, generally speaking, that they're lower than during the week. Well, why? When you've got any other business, if you had more customers, you'd have more staff, and that doesn't apply sometimes on the railway. So I think they're the areas that we can certainly push at going forward.
Thanks. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you very much. So, as is right, there's a number of places in the priorities where you mentioned the Assembly and the Transport Committee. So I just wanted to ask you to outline a bit more about that. You talk about deepening and widening your relationships with Assembly members and London MPs. It also talks about drawing on insights from a proposed survey, and also engaging with new Assembly members who were elected after the election. So would you like to, I don't know who the right person would be to answer that, possibly Michael? Would you like to go into that in a bit more detail and tell us about how you plan to engage with the Assembly members as a whole and with the committee?
Let me start off. In terms of the deepening and widening point, my sense is, but obviously it's only my perception, but my sense is that as an organisation we have a good relationship with the committee, and we have a particularly good relationship with the leads of the four main groups, and I have regular monthly calls with each of the four leaders, which is exceptionally helpful to us. What I'm equally mindful of is that every member on the committee will be tapping into constituent concerns about transport issues around the capital, and perhaps that's an area of opportunity for us to understand better. I mean, we clearly don't want to, take more of your time than is appropriate, but you are a source of enormous information about what's going on out there, to add to all the other sources of information, and I think that would enrich the work that we do alongside your own work. That goes for the committee membership as it stands today, but clearly, we would want to do that with whatever the composition of the committee is going to look like after next May. So that was a little bit about what does the deepening and widening refer to. It's about developing our relationships, but for a purpose, which is to kind of tap into your knowledge and to your insight alongside all the other sources that are out there for us.
That makes a lot of sense. So I'm one of the group leads for the committee, so we do meet regularly. But you're saying you don't currently meet with the constituency Assembly members in a similar way, and you want to do more of that, essentially.
Yeah, with the non-specialist, non-transport specialist committee members. Members in the round. I mean, I think this committee would be our natural starting point, but equally, we want to build a relationship across the Assembly, and not just necessarily limited to members of this committee. But as I said, we want to do that in a proportionate way. We don't want to over abuse the privilege of the great contact that we have with you and your colleagues.
Okay, great. And Tricia, I think you wanted to come in on that. It makes sense that as the chair, you'd have a slightly different role in relation to us.
I mean, completely. I mean, I think what Michael has just said is spot on. And I realise that the dynamics of the hearing this morning is that you ask us questions and we answer them. But there is a question from us to you as well as what it is that you want. What would work for you? How can we work together in a less formal way? What's the right place for us to have a more deliberative kind of conversation about priorities? So really happy to continue that conversation once in post. And I think the other thing, again, we've mentioned it before, but the change in the last year of a kind of willingness on the part of the committee to commission Travel Watch in real time to answer questions that are of relevance to it right now. I think that's something that I think we're all really keen to continue into the next year as well.
Yeah, we did find that a really, really helpful exercise, actually, and it was just very, very great to have your evidence that had been put together so well. So the next thing I wanted to ask about was casework, if that's all right. There's Priority 7 talks about improving casework operations and talks about the imminent award of a new contract. How are you going to make sure that the current levels of service will be maintained in your new contract?
A couple of immediate thoughts. The first is that the process of evaluating the bids. We went out to competitive tender under the Crown Commercial Services process. Shortlisted the bidders. They were all evaluated on the basis of a weighting which put 80% of the weight on service delivery and 20% on price. So, kind of up front. The emphasis is on making sure that there is a quality of service that is sustained. This wasn't about necessarily, seeking the cheapest price. when I say we, this work has been done jointly between ourselves and Transport Focus because, as I'm sure committee members are aware, our team provides the appeals handling work on behalf not just of London Travel Watch but also Transport Focus in a shared arrangement with that organisation. So with regard to the contact centre provider that the public use as their first point of contact with us, it was a joint exercise, but we have worked closely with them to kind of evaluate the bid. We have now identified the preferred bidder. We are literally in the process of concluding the kind of formal arrangements, and as part of that work, my head of casework, Susan James, is devoting a larger part of our time over the next 3 months to the start of the new contract to make sure that the mobilisation to start anew is in the right place, so that we we hit the ground running with the new contract in the spring of next year.
Okay, great, thank you. And Chair, I'm just going to do the next 2 bits in a different order, so I haven't actually finished when I do the one that appears to be the last one. The business plan also mentions, I think in sequence, you would make the contract and then work with our service provider to identify potential efficiencies. Obviously, efficiencies is a pseudonym, for cuts. So. What does that mean, and is that not all spelled out in the contract in terms of the prices and what you'll get in return?
So what that refers to is the fact that the preferred bidder has proposed that once they are in post and are able to understand precisely, to generate a bit of experience in running the service, they are committing to work with us and Transport Focus to identify efficiencies. So one of the areas possibly would be to use a greater level of automation in the way that we handle contacts, particularly for the more kind of straightforward contacts that the public would have with us. Clearly, in thinking about that as an area of opportunity, we're mindful that this is about dealing with members of the public who are often have concerns that need to be managed carefully, and automation is not the only answer, but it's a potential one. And I think the committee would probably feel it remiss of us not to be thinking about those areas of possible efficiency gain. But the basic commitment is to work with the provider to sit down and look at where is the scope for efficiencies in future.
Okay, great. I'm sure we'll have lots more questions about that in future.
Think, just on efficiencies, I know it tends to be used as a pseudonym just for cost cutting, and that's fine. But I think this element of innovation, I think this is an area where we can look at very actively with the new provider. They work with other industries across the world, and I think there's a lot for us to learn. But until they're actually in place, it's difficult for us to know exactly the scope and relevance of some of that work that they've already done.
Okay, yeah, exactly. We'll see what happens. And then finally, just a question about trends in casework. There's a sort of mini report about up to the 31st of October the appeals that you've handled. It's very, very interesting. It reports success rates for different modes, and it seems like there's a higher success rate for things like the bikes, but also the ultra emission zone, congestion charge, penalty charge notices that you handle as well, compared with rail and bus type passenger appeals. So what's the reasoning for that? Is it to do with volume? Are you expecting a higher volume in future, or people to get more used to the fact that you're also the appeal body for those things? What's going on with those things? Because it seems like it says 73% for non-passenger appeal cases versus 44% or 41% of rail appeals.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly difficult to certainly to forecast. One of your points, what the workload will look like from one year to the next. In terms of the overall numbers, the volume of contact that we're experiencing this year compared with last year is lower, and part of the reason for that is we had a spike last year. with a lot of passengers raising issues about their experience with Eurostar, who had closed down their phone lines for a couple of months during the year in the summer. So we had a spike then, and that's subsequently died down, but it means that this year we're experiencing a lower level of contact. But in terms of, as it were, success rate, we are slightly ahead of where we were last year. But it's slightly difficult to sort of compare one year with the next, because the nature of the issues. So that was a particular case in point. The Eurostar issue was a kind of a one-off that led to that spike in contacts, which we're not experiencing this year. And I think that's the same issue when we look at what's behind the kind of success rates related to different modes. It just kind of depends on the very specific circumstances that happen to have generated the appeals that the passengers are bringing forward to us.
And we do rely on providers exercising an element of discretion in this. We don't have powers over any provider. We can influence them. And the truth is, some of the train operators, they will turn back and say, well, technically, this person was in breach. And we can't argue with that. If the legal fact is, yes, they didn't buy a ticket and they should have done, there might be extenuating circumstances, but we find sometimes with the rail industry that's less likely to hold water. But in other areas, I think we've had greater success because people are willing to be a bit more lenient, a bit more flexible.
So my thought was basically that essentially for road modes, people are not as used to coming to you for support. So the cases you do get, maybe the harder cases, or the one, not the harder cases, the ones which are more egregious and more unjust, and therefore you win more. But I'm not sure if that's anything you've looked at.
I think there might be something in that, but I think it's worth looking at even further than we have done, to be honest. Yeah, to try and understand what drives these outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman McCartney, you wanted to come in.
Yes, you earlier said that as Assembly members, we often know what's going on in our area, and that would be useful information for you. But I suppose the other way as well, through your complaints or your casework, are you able to identify perhaps geographical locations where there's difficulty that might be of interest to us, for example, as constituency members?
I don't think there's a kind of a natural pattern. It's not as if we're always seeing hot spots, if you like, of complaints. And of course we cover a range of different modes as well, so it doesn't necessarily mean that it would apply to all of the areas that we cover. But if it becomes the case that we are seeing a particular spike again in complaints in a particular area, then I think that would be exactly the sort of thing that we would want to kind of share with an individual assembly member through the kind of deeper relationship that I said we wanted to develop.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to thank our guests for attending today and for their answers to our questions. We have a few more items of business, but could I ask our guests just to remain for a few minutes, please? I've got to do something at the end. So can I ask the committee to approve London Travel Watch's proposed business plan for 24-25, as set out in packet 1? Can we note the committee's work programme?
Noted.
The next meeting of the committee is scheduled for the 23rd of January 2024 at 10 a.m. in the chamber. And then I come to any other business. Well, yes, there is some other business actually on this occasion. Quite pleasant, really. I would personally, and I'm sure the committee too, would love to thank Arthur Leathy for all the work he's done over the last 6 years. Still probably got a bit more to do. Can I say from my own position, I was in the chair, I think, when Arthur took over. And Arthur, you've just made a massive improvement on Travel Watch. The relationship between us and Travel Watch has just improved immeasurably. And also thank you, because I think now we've got a fantastic team. Michael, and I'm very much looking forward to working with Tricia. Michael and Arthur, you've done a great job in building up the team. Tricia, you're taking over at a wonderful moment. I'm sure you'll take things forward. But Arthur, you have just got to, you've got to accept that you have made a fantastic improvement in all levels. I'm going to ask Caroline if you'd like to say something at this moment.
Lovely, thank you very much. Yes, I want to put on record my thanks to you, Arthur. You have taken Travelwatch through unprecedented changes, whether it's the whole structure of the organisation, where you are based, several chief execs, and actually the partnership with Transport Focus, which was really bold, and we really wanted you to go there. And I think we've seen the benefits of that close relationship, but also that relationship with the Transport Committee, supporting our work and making sure that London passengers are getting the best service possible. I think that relationship has never been better, and I think that's down to your work and your leadership as chair. So thank you very much indeed for all your work.
Do any of the other leads want to say anything at all?
Well, without gilding the lily, it's a pleasure working with you, Arthur, and London Travelwatch is an organisation that you and everyone else involved with it should be very, very proud of. And thank you very much.
Member Berry?
Yeah, I mean, everyone said an awful lot, but your wisdom, your insight, your strategic vision, the way that you deal with people, it's just been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, finally we have... sorry?
Could I get the chance to say just a few words?
I was going to ask a bit later. Go on,
delighted to hear that, and thank you so much for your kind words. And I genuinely, I feel very proud of what London Travelwatch has achieved. But I think the work that we've done together is just, I do feel pride in that. I think it wasn't the easiest challenge for any of us at the beginning, I know, but we worked together and we got through that. And I think we've got the organisation in a much better place in terms of credibility and in terms of its influence. So I'm absolutely confident that Michael and Tricia are going to take this organisation to new heights, and I'll be able to watch these proceedings in future from the luxury of my own home. So, but thanks genuinely to all of you. You've been a great help to me and a great support. So thank you.
Right, so finally we've got a small gift as a token of our appreciation, but I think it'd be appropriate actually if the person who's either been chair or vice chair during the entirety of your reign, if I'm polite, is Caroline Pidgeon. So would you like to do the presentation, Caroline?
Thank you very much.
On that note, high note, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. Right, we do a photo.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.